Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 54 of ThROH The Years, the podcast that reviews Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. I'm Trevor Dame. I'm one half of the show, joined as always by Matt Feuerstein, the other half of the show. Although, Matt, I guess sometimes when we have a guest, technically we then each fall to 1/3 of the show for those episodes.
And really, in every other episode, you are 2/3 of the show.
No.
But I'm happy to be a third. It's really the highest fraction I've ever been. So thank you for allowing it.
But this is a big episode of the show. This is one of those episodes that from when you asked me, how about we do this podcast? This is one of those shows I had circled in my mental calendar of this will be one to do. And some other big things going on for us because while we are still on the Pro Wrestling Only network, which I guess we'll talk about in a second, we still are and how great they are, and we'll plug them. But we also now have our own podcast feed because some of you people, even though we tell you time and time again how many great podcasts past and present are on the Pro Wrestling Only podcast network, some people, I realize they just, for purposes of sorting or whatever, they like having, they want us in its own feed. So Matt, you have gone and done the work. Tell them about, we now have our own separate ThROH The Years podcast feed.
Yes, and I sympathized with everybody who was making the comments over the past couple of years that you wanted to be able to download the old episodes because, you want to just share these episodes with your children, with your grandchildren, your stepson, whenever you have him, if you don't already, just all these people. And it was harder, we all had our episodes on SoundCloud. Thank you to everybody at the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network, Kelly, Chad, Charles, John, everybody who's, Travis, whoever has helped out over time. And it's great, and we're still on it, and we are proud members. But I thought that it was important to have this go-to feed that you could just go directly, find any episode very quickly, download it to whatever device you want. So I have thankfully made that happen. You can find the podcast now in the end of feed on all of your favorite podcast-related apps. You can Apple Podcasts, Dogcatcher. You can find it on Stitcher. You can Spotify as always. If there's any podcast-related service that you use in which you cannot find ThROH The Years, and including all of our archived episodes, please let me know, and I'll do what I can. I'm even uploading every episode. This one will take a little bit longer, but eventually all of the episodes will be up on our YouTube channel.
I noticed that.
Yeah, I guess that's more for us to promote the show as opposed to convenience for you, but some people do like listening to podcasts on YouTube, so it will be there eventually. There are already a couple episodes up, but all the episodes are up on all these other platforms, so please enjoy. It also allows us to put out the episodes pretty much as soon as we're done recording them, so that's a bonus as well. So hopefully when you hear this episode, it will be well, for those of you who are really on top of things, it will be the night that we recorded it. So, just a level of control and stuff. But I hope you all enjoy the archives and the hopefully convenience of having this all in one place.
And I just want to make clear, if you guys don't check out the Pro Wrestling Only podcast feed, especially, I don't know how every app works, but you might have to go search on Google for the Pro Wrestling SoundCloud, but not only is there still great podcasts going there today, you are missing out. There is just probably literally thousands of hours of incredible shows. We were listeners of that network before we were on the network, so there are so much good stuff there. And
one of the things about the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network and why they came to us and why we were happy to be a part of it, and I feel like we're a good fit, is that they have a lot of cool niche programming involving wrestling. It's not just your basic, not that there's anything wrong with this, but it's not just your basic, here's what happened on Raw this week, here's what happened in New Japan last week, AEW, whatever. They go deep. They have a lot of stuff about the past. They have a lot of stuff about, promotions that you don't hear too much about, podcasts that go way back into the 70s, into the 80s. And, unlike some of the popular podcasts, it's not just let's review the pay-per-view that happened this month 25 years ago. Like, no, they're talking about random syndicated shows. They're talking about old Japanese tours and cards, just all sorts of different niche programming. A lot of great podcasts. I believe, I'll edit this out if I'm wrong, but Between the Sheets started on this podcast network, right?
Yes, it did.
Yes,
I remember. Yeah,
so it's like that sort of vibe there. So it's a great network if you're not just interested in the most mainstream of mainstream wrestling, or if you're not interested in the most current stuff. You want to hear about quirky things and oddball things and just things that maybe are half lost to history, if not for the great historians that populate the Pro Wrestling Only podcast network.
And the one other thing I just want to make clear, even though I think it's, I think most people probably aren't going to assume different, but just in case, all this is doing is we're adding new feeds. Like, we're not charging money or we're, through the years, we've never charged money. We never will. Nothing's changing except we're just giving you more options for how to listen. Like, the only thing we'll ever ask of you is, if on, say, your Apple Podcasts or whatever your favorite podcast, host, if you want to give it a review, if you like the show that much, that I'm sure that probably helps in some weird algorithm way.
Oh yeah, and subscribe. Now that you can do that, subscribe directly to our show. That would be fun to have subscribers.
Exactly. But we're not asking anything of you, not that there's anything wrong with that. This is just, we're not changing anything up. It'll be the same podcast. It's just more options for how to listen for people that have been asking for it. So,
yeah. And I think the main benefit of this to me is that you can find the old episodes and download them and listen to them however you want, like in a very convenient way. The new episodes, the Pro Wrestling Only Podcast Network is still going to have them up as we do them. So if you're subscribed to that, you're going to get the episodes. So don't feel any pressure to subscribe to our channel, but if you like us and just like us to have higher numbers, go ahead and do that.
Yeah, much like Burger King, you can now have it your way. I lied earlier. We do have sponsors now. We are contractually mandated every 10 minutes to plug Burger King, so expect that to happen a lot over the course of this episode.
Normally it's Burger King that just plugs me up.
Hey-oh. We only have a little bit of news that between the last show and this show, even though it was like a month between shows, but a couple things. The first is just a very minor thing, but it annoys me, but not in a serious, angry way, but just a fun way, which was one of the first ROH mysteries, as I occasionally dub them. Things that we discovered that often never get solved, such as when I tweeted to Spanky what was in his Wendy's order on the first Ring of Honor show and he never responded to me, or when I tweeted to Samoa Joe recently, did he ever actually go trick-or-treating with Jushin Liger like he said he would in his live journal?
I hope he goes tweeting with him.
And but one of the other early Ring of Honor mysteries was I believe it was Honor Invades Boston, one of the first five, I think that was maybe the sixth show Ring of Honor had ever done. There's a Amazing Red versus Quiet Storm match, and Quiet Storm actually does a running Canadian Destroyer, and this predated P.D. Williams, and I always was wondering, I asked and no one really gave a big answer, but did Quiet Storm actually invent the Canadian Destroyer and no one's just really noticed or remembered that? So Matt, when I was reading the observers for this period of time for tonight's episode, there was something where I didn't see exactly the context, but there was some section where they were basically Dave was talking about this hot move, the Canadian Destroyer, and P.D. Williams invented it. And I guess a couple of weeks later, he published a correction, and I'll just read it here. Regarding P.D. Williams and the Canadian Destroyer move, Amazing Red actually did a running version of the move on a 2002 Ring of Honor show. Matt, this is how little respect and how cursed Quiet Storm is. The correction still leaves him out because he did it to Amazing Red in that match, not the other way around. He doesn't even get mentioned by name in the correction. And I just felt I felt bad for Quiet Storm. Reading that, I was just oh man, Destiny does not want you to be known as the guy who invented this move, because apparently I mean, according to Dave, he thinks that from reading that section, he clearly thinks then someone told him, no, like, that's the first time this move ever happened. But even then, somehow Amazing Red got credit for it.
You know, it's a good thing that we have social media now, because in the recent years, I've seen Quiet Storm tweet about how he did it first. So at least now he has the ability to advocate for himself instead of having to be at the behest of these dang dirt sheets. Let's become one of those podcasts that talks crap about dirt sheets. They're very popular.
Matt, nothing will stop us then. Like, subscriptions would go through the. I mean, we're doing fine with listeners right now, but man, we would be millions. We'd be rich. But yeah, I mean, nothing against Quiet Storm's career. Like, I don't want to denigrate him, but like, that's probably, you know, if he was more well known for doing that, that's probably like the thing that would be like a huge part of his legacy. Like, he's still wrestling in places like Pro Wrestling Noah and stuff, but, you know, Canadian Destroyer is a move that's still done to this day. I mean, it's become kind of like the go-to move for people that are 50 and over in wrestling to show, like, hey, I'm still with it. I can do what the kids do. You see, like, Ricky Morton and Dustin Rhodes doing the Canadian Destroyer and the Code Red and stuff like that now.
What does that tell you about that move?
That's very physically draining, Matt. Mm-hmm. But... you know, it was one for a few years. It was like the it move, and I feel bad for Quiet Storm that he does not. It's not as widely known. That from everything I can tell, you know, there's always a chance there could be an earlier example, but the best I can tell, no one's ever corrected me on this. He was the first guy to ever do that move. So
yeah, and, I think we should do a whole special episode just about Quiet Storm for free because we don't charge.
Yeah, no Patreon exclusive,
no.
You know, even though, again, we're leaving a lot of money on the table. But
the guy needs to get his due, and we're the ones to give it to
him. We have one other story. This is a much more directly affecting Ring of Honor and a bigger story. Have a couple quotes from a couple different newsletters. We'll go first to The Observer in their WWE news section from an issue around this time. Dave writes, Ricky Steamboat was at TV in both Buffalo and Rochester. Both sides have agreed to a 3-week tryout. If both he and WWE are happy with the results at that time, they'll attempt to work out a financial deal. If he does work full-time, it would be every weekend, so he'd be out of Ring of Honor. However, he would be allowed to get some weekends off to work with Harley Race and Les Thatcher on seminars and wrestling camps. He's getting a 3-week tryout as an agent. Those who have worked with him in Ring of Honor in that role couldn't praise him enough when it comes to his ability to see the smallest details in a match that make a difference and to teach young wrestlers. In that sense, he was compared with Jim Cornette and Paul Heyman from those who have worked with both. Steamboat and the company have had their negative history, including lawsuits and bad blood over the final time he left. Steamboat has a lot of non-wrestling business things going on, and taking this job because of the travel would mean he'd likely have to give that up. And then we'll go to like a week or two later, the trial's done, and the Pro Wrestling Torch reported. Ricky Steamboat signed a contract with the WWE to be a full-time road agent, which means he'll be working closely with wrestlers at events on the content of their matches, especially the finishes. Steamboat, besides working for Ring of Honor occasionally this year, was part owner of R&D Auto and Marine Specialists. He sold his share of that business in order to move on to the WWE. Besides his wealth of experience from his in-ring career, he will bring with him the perspective of having been involved in both TNA and Ring of Honor over the past couple of years. No other road agents in WWE have the fresh, first-hand experience of working elsewhere recently. Given that Ring of Honor is considered the state-of-the-art in terms of progressing the in-ring style in this country, Steamboat could bring that perspective with him, and it may benefit some of the stagnant wrestlers in WWE. The original decision to bring Steamboat in was John Laurinaitis' call, yet another move by Laurinaitis to surround himself with people he hired rather than holdovers from the previous regime. Steve Keirn, the previous agent hired before Steamboat, was also a Laurinaitis hire. So, Matt, I have more quotes from different people and comments about Steamboat on the next show, Final Battle, because that's his final show with Ring of Honor. So we can sum up Ricky Steamboat's run in Ring of Honor more next episode. But this period here was basically this is the events that ended his Ring of Honor time. And yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, he definitely had I know a lot of the guys there spoke really highly. Like in researching this episode, I was rewatching some of the old CM Punk Samoa Joe shoot interview, and CM Punk goes out of his way to say that like he learned a lot from Ricky Steamboat in the less than a year he was in Ring of Honor.
Yeah, I mean, everyone says they learned a lot from Ricky Steamboat, and I also thought his on-camera performances, he wasn't the best promo in the world, but he sort of got to flex his promo muscles a little bit more than he had pretty much did at any other time in at least his modern day career, more than he ever did in WWF and more than he did in a lot of his periods in WCW, just in terms of like playing different characters, getting to be like almost vaguely heelish at different points with Foley. And he just got a lot of chances to talk and do stuff. And, he wasn't a great promo even at that point, but he added a lot, I think, of gravitas to different situations that he was in. And like you said, backstage, everyone thinks that he was extremely helpful. And the wrestling and Ring of Honor, all those guys did continue to improve that year. And I'm sure if they say that Steamboat was a big part of it, it certainly seems plausible to me. When we get to the main event tonight, we're going to talk about a big spot that both Joe and Punk give him credit for that I thought was very effective. Yeah, it's interesting, if you go back and watch WWE from 2004 to 2005 to see if there were any differences. But I'm sure that Steamboat being in the WWE locker room was nothing but a benefit to the guys that were there. And, also the time was right. I mean, he did, it's not like Steamboat being in Ring of Honor for much longer would have really done much for him or for them. It was a pretty decently long run. He wasn't there all the time, but he made a decent amount of shows, and I think his time was up there. So it was good for him to move on to bigger things.
Yeah, I mean, certainly on camera, maybe off camera he could have had longer, but then how financially viable is that for both Steamboat and Ring of Honor if he's not doing stuff on camera? But yeah,
Ring of Honor didn't really employ like producers or agents. Yeah.
Which is part of the reason why a guy like that's so valuable, where you're hiring him to show up for on-camera stuff, but he can basically be kind of like an unpaid agent, if he's interested in doing it. I'm sure a lot of these guys, they come in and they probably had no interest and they weren't asked to, but a guy like Steamboat that just seemed to care, and be interested, obviously helped guys a great deal. But, and that brings us to the show, the second last show he was on. This is one of the biggest Ring of Honor shows we've covered. I feel like I've been saying that a lot lately, but this was a huge run of Ring of Honor shows at this point in their history. And we get to Ring of Honor All-Star Extravaganza 2. It took place December 4th, 2004, at the Rexplex in Elizabeth, New Jersey, in front of a reported crowd of 750 fans.
Just goes to show how important some of these outside talents are, that this show would have, significantly fewer people than the last show, even though on paper the lineup is about as built up and star-studded by ROH, guy standards as you could imagine at that point. And the biggest and most built and hyped up main event they've ever had. Yeah,
Mike Johnson, I'll get to it in just a second. He made a point very similar to what you just made, Matt. But I think we mentioned this on the last show, but Mike Johnson, this is also a weird like little thing for Ring of Honor at this period, where at this point they toured between a handful of cities, but this was actually like, so usually they rotated, but this was their last show was at the Rexplex, Weekend of Thunder Night 2. And then they came back 1 month later. Their very next show was at the Rexplex again. And in fact,
also noteworthy that they were just completely off for a month.
Yeah. And we mentioned this, I believe, on the last show, but, the Mick Foley promo that's right before an intermission with CM Punk on the last show, that's where they announced that there's going to be Punk Joe 3 at this show. And we mentioned that Mike Johnson was at that show. He said that I believe they said they set yes, let me just read the quote. The promotion again broke its advanced ticket sales for the show when they went on sale. So at least, obviously, even though they didn't come close to hitting the Liger Night 2 ticket sales, at least the people in the building, like the core fans, were really excited hearing that, a month later they were going to get Punk Joe 3. But like you mentioned, Matt, I'll read a different Mike Johnson quote from his coverage of this show. The Elizabeth show drew between 550 and 650, which was down from the 1,000 to 1,100 they had the previous month from Jushin Liger's appearances, which shows what a huge draw he was for the company. One of the things Ring of Honor does have in their favor when the crowd is down is the sheer amount of merchandise they move in one evening, because all night on December 4th, there was a group of fans buying stuff at the table. So Johnson's numbers, any live estimates are always going to deviate from the numbers I give just because I always go with the Observer just to have one consistent source. But still, I no matter what numbers you look up, like your point remains, which is hundreds of people likely came just for Liger. And the difference between, like you just mentioned, even though if you're just an indie wrestling fan, I would argue this card is better than Weekend of Thunder Night 2, but It doesn't have Liger. It doesn't have the huge legend that you haven't seen in America in a long time.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, because, and the other record-breaking shows, for, one was for WrestleMania 20 weekend. It had, had Dusty Rhodes on it, had Ricky Steamboat's debut. The Final Battle had Great Muta and other All Japan stars, and of course Death Before Dishonor had Jeff Hardy, fairly fresh off of being a big star in WWE. So it just goes to show a lot of fans who really swell the numbers at those shows. I guess they basically treat ROH as like just an indie where it's like, oh, Jeff Hardy's coming to a show, or oh, the Great Muta's coming. Like, I'm sure a lot of those people, they know that Ring of Honor was different than your local indie at the time, bringing in a legend, but it just wasn't enough for them to follow it. I feel like over the course of the next couple years that we review, you're going to have more and more people that are going to just show up for ROH just for ROH, for to have guys like Danielson and Joe and Homicide be the stars that they come for. Like, at the time, I was so into ROH. Not really at this point, but like 6 months after this. I was so into ROH that, I would be way more excited to see, to see Samoa Joe than I would be to see Jeff Hardy or to see, even Ricky Steamboat, at that point, just because I was so into the product of ROH that I, Joe was the bigger star to me. So I feel like ROH is still in the process of getting more and more fans to think like that.
Yeah, and that's a really great point. And I think kind of hitching a ride on that point, it would be that I feel like they're also kind of transitioning where some of those shows you talk about, when they booked a big name to draw, it was sort of like the match they put them in wasn't the draw. It was just, hey, you get to see them. Like, hey, Jeff Hardy's here, and no one remembers what match Jeff Hardy was in.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. But it was just the draw was Jeff Hardy's here. And likewise, no one, Great Muta and Arashi versus Christopher Daniels and Dan Moff is not a dream match, but people came because, hey, the Great Muta's here. But I think as even this year and as time goes on, the focus becomes more and more. You're not just seeing a legend if it's still an active wrestler, but you're seeing like a big name in a big Ring of Honor match. Like Liger had Danielson, and then he wrestled Danielson and Key the night too. Kobashi's a draw on his own, but they put him in a major match with Samoa Joe. The draw wasn't just Kobashi. It was, holy shit, it's Kobashi versus Joe. Even when like Lance Storm comes later, it's Lance Storm versus Bryan Danielson. It becomes more, yes, the big name is the draw, but it's also the context of you're going to see what the big name does in like the world of Ring of Honor.
That's a really good point. And actually Kobashi is an interesting example because you almost start to see the reversal of that trend when he shows up. Because if you remember, and I guess I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. We'll have plenty of time to talk about this in 7 or 8 years when we get to it. But when Kobashi goes to Philadelphia for ROH, his show actually draws a lot less than the shows upcoming after that feature CZW versus ROH. So it becomes like almost like CZW. The indies, they do become a draw in and of themselves.
Yeah, that's such a crazy thing because that seems almost sacrilegious to say, but like that's the truth. Like in some respects, that feud was a bigger draw than Kenta Kobashi, like coming to America, which nuts, but it was the truth. But Few other notes from Mike Johnson on this show that just don't really fit anywhere else. Mike Johnson wrote about the Rexplex. The venue opened up a sports bar. Not sure how much of an effect the alcohol is going to have on the fans down the line, but didn't seem to cause any problems last night.
It's funny because I remember Punk I never went to the Rexplex, but I remember Punk in his promo at Death Before Dishonor being like, "Oh, you poor people having to be at a venue that doesn't serve alcohol. How are you doing?" And I guess now they changed it, but I believe, spoiler alert, the Rexplex closes completely a few months later. So I'm guessing that's why they started serving alcohol. They were probably having monetary troubles.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think that's like a desperation move from a company that's just like, maybe if we let them drink beer here, they'll be more likely to come to these wrestling shows or anything, really. Whatever, Rexplex ran a lot of entertainment, I guess. But a couple other notes. Mike wrote, the Maximos came by to promote their Fusion show this Friday in the same venue. Ring of Honor management welcomed them in and gave them their blessing for them to hand out flyers and wish them well with the show. So I thought that was interesting because the Maximos were promoting their own Fusion company around this time. It was interesting that, sometimes you hear, when we covered the first year of ThROH The Years, there's a lot of those early months of Ring of Honor about just how all of those Philly indies were like, seem to just hate each other's guts. So it is pretty, it's kind of a little bit heartwarming to see that Ring of Honor apparently like outright just said, yeah, you can promote your show that's coming up in the same venue the next week. Like, I wonder, compare that to, oh, sorry.
I was going to say, I wonder how much a change in ownership changed the tone of that whole thing.
Yeah. And like, that makes a lot of sense too. And just, compare that to 2002 where like, people were trying to lock up exclusivity to certain buildings in Philly, and just a lot of little petty feuds and things like that. But Mike Johnson also wrote, a lot of fans I spoke to expected CM Punk to get the belt before the show, so Ring of Honor did a really excellent job of building to the main event. I guess we can talk about that a little bit later, or significantly later in the show. And then finally, Mike Johnson used to love to do this, and he wrote here, there were fans from Japan, Canada, and California in attendance at the show last night, as well as all over the Eastern Seaboard. So I wonder if that speaks to – that probably has to do more with Bobby Heenan and Cornette's face-off than Punk Joe, I would guess, but I guess you never know.
You think that people came from Japan to see Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette face-off? I guess maybe. It's just – maybe just my mindset is so different that that didn't occur to me. Because, to me, it's like, oh my God, everyone's just waiting for this Joe versus Punk match. But I guess you're right. Like to like a normal person, Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette are a bigger deal. And that angle was a big deal. But it's just hard for me to wrap my brain around that at that point, because the Joe versus Punk series is just so legendary in my mind now.
And that's something else that, I didn't think about until I just read that, and it just reminded me what's happening on the show we're about to review. But when we're talking about how, hundreds fewer fans came to this show than the last one, not only was it, the blow off to Punk Joe, not only did you have Homicide versus Bryan Danielson, Low Key versus Austin Aries, it was, the big draw of the show. One of the reason it was All-Star Extravaganza 2 as the name was it was the first ever kind of confrontation between Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette in wrestling history. And so when you add that in there, and it still drew hundreds less, like that really speaks, I would guess, to Liger.
Liger, and of course a legendary wrestler is always going to be a bigger draw than a legendary manager. It's great, but obviously Bobby Heenan, Jim Cornette's been there a bunch of times, but Bobby Heenan is, as far as managers go, like pretty much the legend in wrestling managers. But yeah, even, and of course you can always argue, as promoters always do, the season, it's December, it's getting cold, the holidays are coming up, people aren't going to, live events as much. I don't know, maybe there's something to that. It's their second show in
a month here in the Rexplex, which, a month is a fair amount of time between shows, but still, they turned around and ran it again immediately after the last one.
It is an interesting choice, but yeah, I guess, so many factors go into drawing. Sometimes it's just a puzzle, but I think we can say pretty clearly that Jushin Liger in 2004 was a big draw in the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area.
So now we'll finally get to the show itself. It was a double DVD set, long show, I think like 4.5 hours or approaching 5, maybe. It was a long show. We open backstage with the return of not just Colt Cabana, but the return of his talk show segment, Good Times, Great Memories. Colt calls Generation Next a bunch of punks for taking him out from the last few Ring of Honor shows by injuring his shoulder. And he says by punks, he doesn't mean CM Punk. Colt says because of the lost money for the missed dates, he couldn't pay his cell phone bill, his water bill, his heating bill, or his prostitute bill. I didn't know prostitutes like billed you on like long time. I'm shocked, that he was able to, run a tab, but obviously I'm not taking this seriously or anything. Colt says,
"Well, you're just talking away, trying to make us not realize how many prostitute bills that you have."
No, just swimming in them. But Colt says tonight, Strong and Evans will pay, but even more importantly, it's Good Times, Great Memories. Colt puts on a Santa hat because it's December, and he says he's going to have one of the biggest guests ever, Twiggy the water skiing squirrel, but he's a little late, so until then he's joined by Bobby the Brain Heenan. Heenan walks in to applause, and he has a giant plastic candy cane around his neck because, again, it's December. Colt welcomes Bobby to Chicago because the gimmick with Good Times, Great Memories is it's always in Chicago, even though it hardly ever is. Bobby replies, "This is Toledo, Ohio." Colt at this point actually seems to kind of stumble nervously for a second or two.
Can you blame him?
No, not at all. But it's interesting because Colt, usually very smooth at this kind of stuff. So this is the first time I think I've seen Colt, actually being in kind of a starstruck position. But Bobby quickly steps in. He makes a couple jokes. He compliments Colt. And then Heenan says there must be some kind of idiot that he and Colt can make fun of. Colt then introduces Jimmy Jacobs, who is back to the hussing stuff just for the purposes of this segment because it feels like the last few Ring of Honor shows, they've been trying to push Jimmy away from doing that. But, of course, you can't have the comedy of this segment unless he is hussing. So for one night, he's back to hussing. Heenan calls Jacobs furry boots hair Jordans. He points to Jimmy's black painted fingernails, and he asks him if he's dead from the nails down. Then he asks him if he's a mechanic. Then both Heenan and Jimmy start hussing. Jimmy leaves, or at least walks off camera, and Heenan wonders how much it would cost for Jimmy to haunt a small home, which was a line that made me laugh. Colt points out that Heenan has a debate with Jim Cornette tonight, and Colt wants a preview. Bobby starts by saying he's had some trouble saying some words because he's recovering from cancer, but adds that he feels just fine. He puts over Cornette as a guy that can talk better than he or Jesse Ventura ever could, and he says he's probably the greatest talking manager in the history of the business. Bobby says Cornette does a very good job of making sure his boys have soap and of keeping their socks clean, but there's a maid in Hojo's that could do the same thing. Bobby at this point says Cornette is in a gunfight tonight, and Cornette has a knife, but he has an AK-47. Bang, bang, bye-bye. They wrap up to more applause from off camera. Bobby points to someone off camera and says, "Hey, she has her top off." Colt replies, "Are those real?" And Bobby ends the segment by going, "One is." So, this is our first taste of Bobby Heenan on the night. And, I thought this was pretty fun. And it's kind of the, when Bobby Heenan, for those who don't really have the background, he was recovering from throat cancer, which would kind of be an on and off battle he would be having for years and kind of affect him for the rest of his life. And his voice, clear, his mind was still sharp, but his voice was definitely strained and weaker than it's not the Bobby Heenan voice you would have grown up with in the 80s and 90s. But, he got off some good lines. It was clear, like what I mentioned, like that Colt was starstruck from getting to do a comedy segment with Bobby Heenan, and just a nice way of introducing him.
Yeah, it was surprising to see Bobby, make his big ROH debut in like a backstage segment like this. But it came off really well. I thought he got, with those rounds of applause that he got, were like genuine. Like the people who were like, just there, for the filming were just like, man, we love Bobby Heenan. And he was, he was a really good sport, I thought. And it was great seeing Colt back too. So this was one of my happiest ways to open up a DVD in a while.
I think if there's one takeaway you should get from our review of that segment, it is that I have never paid for sex. Not that I have anything against sex work as an industry, but if anyone that knows me listens to the show, please don't think I've ever paid for sex.
No, he usually just has them come over and lie in bed with him and talk for a while.
He just wants company. More likely. That is far more Hey, do you want to talk about like Low Key's 2002 run? Like he carried that company the first 6 months. I'll pay you $200 an hour. Like, don't take off your clothes. Just
you
let's talk about the
actually
Crush
paid someone right now. They're sitting there just listening to you record.
Matt, I don't feel comfortable unless someone is watching us do the podcast. So we cut out to elsewhere backstage with Allison Danger. She's still in her evening gown as usual, still angry at Knopf and Whitmer as usual. She says that she still owns their contracts and is holding a match contract for a Fight Without Honor, the most dangerous match in Ring of Honor, she says, one they haven't done in a whole year. She says it's for Final Battle 2004, and all she has to do is to get the Carnage crew to sign it. She asked the cameraman to follow her, and she's on her quest to find them. We will see more of that later. I did think it's kind of interesting that like they're hyping a Fight Without Honor as like the most violent match in Ring of Honor, but really all a Fight Without Honor is a no disqualification match. Like,
yeah, I love that they have a distinction. Like the Fight Without Honor is somehow different from all these other no holds barred matches, and also that usually those Fights Without Honor are like not like if you list the most violent matches in ROH history, they're usually not Fights Without Honor.
Yeah, like if someone said like you're going into the War Games or something and it's going to be the most violent, at least you have like a distinctive reason why you could argue that case. But just like we've seen a few months ago, you know, CM Punk and Ace Steel have a really violent like no DQ, no countout match with Moff and Whitmer that was not a Fight Without Honor, but for some reason, even though it's going to be the exact same stip, this is when the violent matches happen, Matt.
Yeah, I would say that's one of the most violent matches in ROH history. I would say both Carino versus Homicide matches we reviewed are the other two most violent matches. Joe versus Jay Briscoe in the cage. The Fight Without Honors, at this point they'd only had two, right? And one of them was like just like kind of like a stiff, hard-hitting strike fest, and the other one was sort of like a big spot fest. Although you could argue that match was very violent as well. But yeah, it's just funny because the Fights Without Honor never really ever get to the point where they really deserve that kind of reputation or hype.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see them really branding it as such here. But finally, we get to the first match on the show, and that would be the Ring of Honor students of Anthony Franco, Davey Andrews, Matt Turner, and Shane Hagedorn. They defeat Special K of Angel Dust, Deranged, Dixie, and Izzy, and they were escorted to the ring by Becky Bayless, Dixie, and Lacey. And, or I guess cage match, you've screwed me because Dixie could not escort them to the ring and be in the match. I think they're also leaving out Cheech and Cloudy, but
Dixie was in the match. Yes, I believe Cheech and Cloudy were there. Yeah.
So anyway, the students win in 4:54 when Davey Andrews pins Izzy with a roll up. Matt, this match is really just a excuse for the post-match angle, which we can talk about after, but I mean, not much to the match, but good luck, Matt. Have some thoughts about this match.
Yeah, it's really much more about the angle. They're making very clear, like, there's the serious Special K members, because all of Special K comes out and they're coming out to music for the first time in a while, but everyone is excited except for Becky, Angel Dust, and Dixie. Angel Dust and Dixie are still very somber, and they're very sullen, in other words that start with S. And, they shake hands, and the others don't. Angel Dust has a new short haircut. I don't know if that's relevant, but I wanted to say so. So that's, there's still the rift in Special K. But Deranged is acting like his old self, and I think this is his first match in months. Am I right about that?
It definitely felt like that. I didn't go back and look, but I was like, oh, Deranged. Like, it was a treat to see him again after so long.
And he was being himself. Like, he was being wacky, and I was like, oh, man, I miss this guy.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because Punk says at one point that he told his students to keep the more, like, party-centric Special K members in the ring. I guess because, they're on drugs, so they're easier to beat. But Deranged dominates when he's in the ring, and also it seemed to me that like the partiers have done better in recent months. Like, didn't Izzy win a match the last month, while Angel Dust and Dixie keep losing all the time? So I don't know if that's good advice. Also, Punk just straight up says on commentary that Davey Andrews is his top graduate, which I'd be like, if I was one of the other students, I'd be like, hey man, you can pretend that you like all of us equally. But yeah, it was, there were, it was mostly, not much to the match. Dixie and Shane Hagedorn do some mat wrestling, which you probably wouldn't have expected in this match. But it's a lot of big moves. Franco, he comes in and he takes like a big like head drop powerbomb driver thingy by Izzy pretty much right off the bat. But Izzy doesn't bother covering, so the announcers say he's just trying to impress Lacey. But winning would impress her most of all, in my opinion. Breaks down. All 8 guys are in the ring. Davey's kind of a house of fire. All the students do their like 10 punches in the corner, except for Davey, because he's his own man. Dixie dives onto Hagedorn. Angel Dust hits a Death Valley driver type of thing on Franco. I always say type of thing because it's never the exact move. They always have some variation on it, Angel Dust backs into Davey and accidentally swings his arm and hits Izzy, which allows Andrews to roll up Izzy to get the surprise win. Honestly, like, it was this in conjunction with the post-match angle. I had no problem with it. I thought it was perfectly fine for what it was. I thought everyone played their roles just fine.
Yeah, this was mostly just, as is the case with all these student matches so far, the students bumping and selling for their opponents. It felt like everyone basically had like 4 mini matches where everyone kind of paired off. Every student got like a minute, except I felt like Shane Hagedorn actually got a little short-changed on time where it felt like everyone else got a full minute. For some reason, it felt to me, I didn't go back and time it, like he got to do way less. And then the match breaks down. There's the 4 count. They're the 4 corner 10 punches, except one of them, I forget which one of the 4 was not doing it in sync. He was like way faster than the crowd. And then like you mentioned, Davey Andrews was just choking his opponent in the corner. So it was like really 2 people in the corner doing 10 count punches for the crowd and then 2 people not doing the spot. The highlight of the match, I do think you mentioned it, was that Anthony Franco taking what I would describe as almost like the awful waffle for people that have watched like Chuck Taylor on the Indies, that kind of on the shoulders into a pile driver. And it was the second straight show, I believe, where Anthony Franco took some kind of pile driver where it looked like he almost was like an inch away from dying. But, it was one of those spots where I believe like Gabe and Punk on commentary, like both gave a little legit scream when they were watching the spot, even though obviously the match had happened. It was not live, but whenever it gets like a real genuine reaction, like a spot, like it always gets a little bit of a chuckle from me. And I thought that end that you talked about where, Angel Dust hits a big move on his student, and then he just kind of stands there looking at him prone on the mat, and then does this real obvious slight stumble backwards into Izzy and Andrews to allow Andrews to get the roll up for the win. I felt that looked really kind of clunky the way they did it. And I realized the point is just building dissension. So it's not my problem with the idea of the finish. It's just how they executed. But overall, yeah, there's not much to the match. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was more just a excuse for the angle. And what the angle is after the match, Becky and Lacey argue like they often do during this period. They're held apart yet again. The Dixie Angel Dust and Izzy side Dixie Angel Dust and Becky's side, I should say, turns to leave when the rest of Special K attacks them from behind. Lacey beats down Becky, including she hits a DDT on her. Izzy and Deranged hit Angel Dust and Izzy with some moves. And we finally have, after all these months of the teasing of dissension, the official Special K split right here.
I think it's funny that like during an evil heel like beatdown, the baby faces do come back, and Dixie hits a code red on Deranged. I just like the idea that like you're having like a violent split from your friends, and you do a code red. I think that's funny. But I would say this: Lacey's implant DDT made me say, "Take that, Mark Nolte," because if you remember, he went on these rants about how Lacey doesn't know anything about wrestling, and I feel like Gabe probably at some point should have been like, she's a wrestler, right? But yeah, he didn't.
And she's a decent wrestler. Like, she's not bad at all. And... But
also at the fact she is a wrestler, decent or not. Yeah. So Nolte acting like she's just some like hanger-on is even more insulting than it would be if it was true.
And one other thing we should mention, I guess, I know, is I believe this was Matt Turner's first, at least main card Ring of Honor match of this crop of students, and he's one of the rare students. He is still working today, I believe. When I was looking over him in Cage Match, he's still working indies, I believe, at least as recently as in the last year or so. So, he's been wrestling for at least 16 years. So a lot of guys can't say that. So good on him.
Yeah.
And he definitely had a lot of kind of piss and vinegar in this match, he would scream and fire up a bit. Obviously, again, hard to really say much about any of the students when most of what they're called to do in these matches is just take bumps and sell in very short matches. But I did notice a little bit there.
I do want to say, I did think the Special K split was pretty well built up to. They didn't rush it. It made sense after a while. Like the kind of the change in attitude of the two guys. The only complaint that I have about the whole situation is that they really do make Dixie and Angel Dust seem like losers the whole time. Like, you want to feel like you want to root for those two, right? Because they're the baby faces.
Yeah.
But they don't really give you much reason to. They're just mopey, and they lose a lot.
Yeah, and they do nice attention to the detail, like even this match and other of the recent matches. Dixie and Angel Dust would shake hands with their opponents, but when the other Special K members would wrestle, they still wouldn't, and stuff like that. But yeah, and we've talked about it in the past, but just the idea that Gabe would always harp on for the entire run of Special K that, like, these guys have so much talent. If they just took things seriously and got off the drugs, they'd be so great. And then the guys to get off the drugs, they're supposed to be the faces, are the ones that go on the losing streak. And Izzy got a win, like, on a recent show, and he's the heel that is reportedly still on drugs. So, like, in that sense, going to your point, yeah, it makes the faces seem like idiots that shouldn't have actually gotten off drugs.
Yeah, I mean, assuming that winning wrestling matches is the only thing important in life. But I will say, like, it's funny because the heart and soul of the babyface faction is actually Becky Bayless. She actually has fire. She actually has personality, unlike the other guys. Unfortunately, she's not going to be around in ROH for much too longer at this point. For too much longer, excuse me. Once they kind of get into like their own like Azrael and Dixie tag team, Becky's sort of out of the picture.
Yeah, and that is a change because really this feud more has been felt up to this point more like a Becky Bayless Lacey feud with with Special K's wrestlers actually being basically like their pawns. Like they're doing more of the promos. They're the ones that are getting into these pull aparts more than the others until this show. And so yeah, to lose her is kind of like losing one half of the feud in a way, even though technically, the wrestlers will keep going. But we cut to Samoa Joe backstage, and he's in a hoodie. I don't know why I wrote that in my notes. I thought, hey, Samoa Joe's in a hoodie. That's different. Joe says to be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. Joe says that Punk begged and pleaded for one more chance against Joe for that world title, and tonight he's got it. Gabe then says, cut, does the trick we've seen in a million Ring of Honor shows where the promo's over and the wrestler thinks it's over, but the camera's still rolling and they fall for it every time, Matt. But anyway, Ricky Steamboat walks in to talk to Joe. Ricky says his series with Punk, Joe's series with matches with Punk reminds him of his own trilogy of matches with Ric Flair. He says he thoroughly enjoyed watching them and says if Joe doesn't mind, he wants to sit out there tonight to watch their third match. Joe says it would be an honor, and they shake hands. And I love that, there's a reason in the match why Steamboat is going to be sitting at ringside. And I love that they go to the lengths, like in a way like this. You did not need to do this little thing. You could have just had Steamboat do what he does later and just come out and say, hey, I'm going to sit at ringside because these matches have been awesome. But instead they actually go out of their way to be like, here's Steamboat asking if he can sit at ringside.
And this is kind of an example of what I've told you about as far as like the two different continuities, the website continuity and the DVD continuity. Because I think on the website they announced that Steamboat would be at ringside like in advance of the show.
Yeah, and I think there's something later where I was listening to an Honorable Mention podcast's review of this show, and they said something about they weren't sure, but they could have sworn that maybe like the Jimmy Jacobs, Colt Cabana, Roderick Strong, Jack Evans tag was previously announced for the show, but then the angle that happens on this show kind of makes it seem like it's an impromptu booking, So like there are definitely some times where when you watch the shows, there are certain things that are made to seem like they just happened on the spur of the moment, where if you actually were following along on the website, you'd be like, no, this was announced 3 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
That brings us, though, to the second match on the show. That would be Jay Lethal defeating the Weapon of Mask Destruction. Not Mask.
What a 2004 name.
Scored to the ring by Prince Nana, and Jay Lethal wins via pinfall in 6 minutes, 39 seconds after he hits the Dragon Suplex. So who was the Weapon of Mask Destruction? That would be Slash Venom, a.k.a. Flash Flanagan, and
AKA hopefully some other word that rhymes with Flash.
Mike Johnson, though, the night of the show or the night after when he wrote his review, did not know that Mike Johnson wrote, Jay Lethal pinned Prince Nana's Weapon of Mask Destruction in 6:39. Not sure who Mask was yet. He actually left the building with his mask on. So yeah, that's dedication, I'll say. And I guess it's not that much dedication, but for the role he had, that's dedication. So
we all have to wear our masks inside, outside, everywhere we go.
We are all weapons of some form of destruction. Mm-hmm. But I thought this match was kind of interesting in the sense of, as a match, I thought it was above average, but nothing special. But it was interesting in structure because a lot of times in these Ring of Honor matches, when there's a new guy getting like a short match, we see him, like, the veteran lets him carry most of the match, even though they're losing in the end. And they're doing, like, every crazy spot they can think of because it's basically their audition. And what I thought was interesting in this case was, this is Flash Flanagan, only his second match of Ring of Honor. He did that, I believe it was him and another wrestler from the Puerto Rico scene wrestling Moth and Whitmer, and it was only like a 3 or 5 minute match, like a really short match there too. And if I remember correctly, the story of that match might have been that they were Allison Danger's hired gun. So is Flash Flanagan done 2 Ring of Honor matches where he's been like a hired gun for someone each time? But that's a weird thing. But anyway, most of these matches where it's like a newcomer, they just do every crazy spot because they only got a few minutes and they're trying to impress. But I thought Flash Flanagan wrestled a very unselfish match, like a very giving match, because this match was all built around him basically being kind of a blank canvas for Jay Lethal to be a really good babyface, which Jay Lethal is. Like, he would let Jay Lethal get a comeback, and then he would slow him down and do something like, a lot of times he would just do something like a chin lock or an eye poke rather than a fancy move. And then Jay Lethal would fight out and make his little comeback, and then, Flash would slow it back down again. It was a very simple but smart structure. I guess the flashiest move, no pun intended, he did was Lethal does a springboard, and Flash catches it and turns it into a power slam.
I would say that's the slashiest move.
and he also does he locks Lethal in a hammerlock at one point, and then rams his head into the buckle while holding the hammerlock, which I thought was a neat little variation of that. But for the most part, this was just about Lethal. And Lethal is a great babyface. He does really nice little comebacks. He always has really great urgency in his comebacks. Like, he's always just a little spitfire of a babyface. And one weird criticism I will say of this match is Jay Lethal does a great job selling his back in this match. And I felt like he almost sold it too good because it's such a short match. And like, I didn't feel like Flash Flanagan did that much, but Jay Lethal is selling his back pretty significantly. I was almost like, you're almost giving this too much credence. Like, it's kind of almost taking me out of the match how much you're selling your back. But overall, I thought it was an above average, but nothing special, little showcase match for Jay Lethal.
I just thought of another gimmick for him. Splash Cannonball. He's a lifeguard.
And you already know what his finisher is. I mean, it's his last name. So.
Yeah, exactly. The Splash. No, just kidding. Splash Mountain and a cannonball. He could do both. Yeah, I wrote something very similar as far as the back selling. Just like, was he even working his back that much? Like, I didn't really notice that. I wouldn't go as far as to say this match was above average. I thought it was a pretty basic match, which is fine. That's what they were going for. But I did think it was kind of strange because, like, didn't they say that Jay Lethal was going to wrestle the Outcast Killers? That was what I remembered. Maybe I'm wrong. But then suddenly this Weapon of Mask Destruction thing. I don't know. I feel like when you just have like a random guy in a mask it doesn't make the match feel that important. Nothing wrong with what the guys did. I did think, some of the storyline stuff was funny, like that Nana raised taxes in Ghana to pay for the weapon of mass destruction. And it's like, you can hire a job guy for not that much money. But Punk decides he's going to call him Ghana Mask, so he doesn't have to say his full name. But he doesn't really stick to that for very long. I feel like Weapon is a perfectly fine way to shorten the name.
Or even Destruction, I mean.
Yeah. WMD. Everyone abbreviated it that way for years. It was just a very basic babyface heel match just to make Lethal seem like a triumphant babyface and get him some wins. That's really all it was. I wouldn't say it was good or bad. There was nothing wrong with anything they did, but it was hard to get into a match like this. I did like how after the match, Nana got on the mic and called Weapon a piece of shit, because you never get anything like just that blunt in a wrestling promo, and it's also just funny to hear Nana say it. And it's also funny because it's like, hey, you hired him, man. That reflects badly on you.
For some reason, that made me laugh like a lot when I was watching it, and just you saying it again made me laugh. Like, it's such a simple thing. Like, I don't know why it's so funny, but just like the fact that he's like, you piece of shit.
All he did was lose a match too.
Yeah, and then like you said, Nana says final battle will be Jay's final battle because he's going to raise the taxes in Ghana again and make every citizen there pay him half of their $25 a week paycheck to put Lethal out of wrestling. I think there was one point during commentary, or maybe it comes later, or something like, Nana himself might have mentioned that like everyone's like listening to this match on the radio, like in Ghana, like they're doing live play-by-play of Ring of Honor in Ghana
to Gabe and CM Punk.
Yeah.
I just wait till we get to Final Battle, because it's a really funny payoff to him saying he's going to raise taxes for this next match that he's going to have.
Good stuff. But after the match, at a few points of the show, I won't go through them all because they're just kind of meaningless, but we get clips of past shows in Ring of Honor, because that's usually what Ring of Honor does on these double DVD releases, is when a show's long enough to be on 2 DVDs, it's usually not long enough to completely fill 2 DVDs. So we almost always will get like extra little video packages, which in Ring of Honor on this show, it's basically just like, hey, do we have a match? Do we have a clips from an older match that kind of plays into this match? We'll show like a minute of it. And, and that also means we get every entrance. Ring of Honor, you can always tell how tight they are from time for how much of the entrances do you get to see on a show. And on a double DVD release set, you're usually getting like every second of every entrance, regardless of how noteworthy or interesting it is. But that brings us to the Scramble Tag Team match. The Outcast Killers of Diablo Santiago and Oman Tortuga, with Prince Nana, defeated BJ Whitmer and Dan Moff, the Carnage Crew of DeVito and Loke, and the Ring Crew Express of Dunn and Marcos in 9 minutes, 21 seconds, when Tortuga pinned Marcos after the Outcast Killers hit their combination drop kick, kind of a full Nelson dragon-ish suplex. I don't know if it's exactly a dragon suplex. Mike Johnson wrote about this match that Loke got banged up during the match and was walking around a little gingerly, but he was okay as he's a tough SOB. Mike Johnson wanted to really put him over. DeVito nearly got into it with a goofball fan who got a little too close to the action.
But the goofball fan was okay because he's a tough SOB.
Matt, what did you think about this match? Kind of a crazy match that went all around the building.
Yeah, I actually thought this was pretty fun. Better than I expected, honestly. I mean, nothing you have to go out of your way to see, but, there was fun stuff. First of all, Alice in Danger skulked down to the ring almost immediately, allowing Punk to get in some very, inappropriate, problematic shots at her. Like when Gabe said, this is more of an anything goes match than a scramble, and Punk said, that's right up Allison's alley, literally. And I'm like, literally? What is the mat? I don't even know what that could mean. Yeah, that's
women, alleys,
yeah,
an empty lane. It's private parts, man.
Mm-hmm.
I have never paid for sex. Anyway, let's move on.
Anyway, so let me try to get back to wrestling we're talking about, right? But they do some fun spots. So basically, they have Marcos, Dunn, and the Outcast Killers there to kind of do some high spots and kind of entertain the fans in the ring while Loke, DeVito, Moff, and Whitmer are fighting in the crowd for a lot of the match. But a lot of the focus is on the Whitmer and Moff versus Carnage Crew feud. So they do things like the Carnage Crew is going to do their Carnage Plex on Tortuga, but Whitmer comes in and helps DeVito do it, and that makes Loke mad. And then there's another spot where Moff and Whitmer are trying to do a double team move, but then Loke comes in and does like the move. I forgot what spot that was, but that makes Whitmer mad, like just, cute stuff like that, which I thought was fine. At one point, Punk says, Loke's Jewish, isn't he? And he's beating up Hillbilly Jesus on BJ Whitmer. And I'm like, I have never heard that Loke was Jewish. And as a Jewish wrestling fan, I always want to know who the Jewish wrestlers are. And I never heard that about Loke. I guess Punk would probably know. He's in the locker room with him. So there you go. Loke, Jewish. You heard it from CM Punk.
Goldberg. Now you have a second hero. You have Goldberg, and now you have HC Loke. Nothing against Loke. He's fine, but
my two heroes. You can tell from listening to me that those are the two guys I model myself after. But yeah, in the crowd, Moff and Loke, they're just hitting each other with chairs. Whitmer and DeVito fight on the other side of the crowd. And back in the ring, Marcos hits a springboard Rana on Santiago, head scissors into a DDT on him. Meanwhile, Loke does an elbow drop off the bleachers onto Moff, while DeVito tries to smother BJ Whitmer with a pizza box, which I have definitely never seen before or since. And Punk says, doesn't he know he'll just come back on Easter anyway? Get it? Because he's Hillbilly Jesus.
Yeah.
But but Tortuga when they and Santiago when they hit their drop kick suplex combo, it's kind of sad that Nana isn't there to celebrate the win by them, but I guess it makes sense given the angle. The other fun point in the match was that at one point when Moff and Whitmer are trying to fire each other up by chopping each other, and Gabe calls them Dunn and Marcos, which is a really funny mix-up because they don't look alike. Just in case you don't know what they look like, those two teams do not look alike. But yeah, it was. I thought it was all over the place, but kind of in a good way. Sufficiently chaotic to be more entertaining than the usual Moff and Whitmer Carnage Crew match. In fact, I think it was probably my favorite match involving these two teams together so far. So I give it a mild thumbs up.
Yeah, I that's about where I would put it too. Where nothing incredible, but surprisingly better than what we've seen from those two teams. Because this scramble, there was no tags even by scramble standards. This was a wild match where second half of it is basically Carnage Crew and Moff and Whitmer brawling into the crowd, almost like Tupelo concession stand brawl. At one point, getting near the Maui frozen drink stand, which I tweeted this online, but you have rarely heard Gabe Sapolsky more earnest on commentary than when he gives a recommendation to the Maui frozen drink stand if you're ever at the Rexplex. Shane Hagedorn, when he saw that tweet, confirmed that apparently those were good drinks. I think I've had multiple people confirm to. Apparently, Maui was the one thing keeping the Rexplex going, if judging by the amount of responses I got to that. But
well, if this was a new thing at this show, then the Maui frozen drink stand was only there for 2 ROH shows. So how much could people really have gotten to love it?
Well, I don't know if the Maui's was new. I'm not sure because I don't think the Maui is alcoholic. Well, I'm not even sure. I
just assumed that it was.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. So this was, I felt like everyone was working hard, but particularly the Carnage Crew and Moff and Whitmer, I thought were working really hard. They did basically all their flashiest regular kind of moves, Moff and Whitmer did the combo figure 4 and frog splash, which they don't break out on every show. They do it sometimes. DeVito did the moonsault to the floor. They did the Carnage, and then like you said, they did kind of some mix-up moves where one member of the Carnage Crew and one member of Moff and Whitmer would do like a classic double team from one of the teams, like the Carnage Plex, or and then we got like the corner basement drop kick and cannonball combo from Moff and Whitmer. So basically every move that they knew that these guys could do that would fit like a very short, hectic, crazy scramble, they made sure to do here. And then the brawl on the outside, like you mentioned, they did the one of my favorite dumb wrestling things, which is whenever someone does a diving, jumping, flying move off the first step of the bleachers, which is like a drop of 1 foot.
Hey, you try it.
Yeah. Hey, I got bad knees, man. I can't do it. Don't expect me to do it. But the pizza box smothering, I just wrote in my notes, I've been there. Yeah, it was more interesting. I'll say this. I'll take this kind of Carnage Crew, Moff and Whitmer brawl a million times over the brawls they normally do, which is just brawl at ringside where everyone's just cutting themselves 30 seconds of the match and they're throwing each other into barricades 100 times. Like, this is 100 times more entertaining than that.
Now, when you say everyone's cutting themselves 30 seconds into the match, you mean the fans, right? Because they're just full of self-loathing at watching the Carnage Crew versus Moff and Whitmer. Was that a problematic joke? I apologize.
I was going to say, in today's COVID era, that's the only way fans now can express their displeasure.
Oh, God, we're bad.
But
canceled. We're canceled.
There was one problem I did notice in the match was there was a couple times where people were clearly just waiting for someone to come in for a spot they were late on. Like, I think the spot you were kind of alluding to, the double team, the mix-up double team you couldn't quite remember was at one point, or maybe, yeah, Moff is holding Omon Tortuga in a waist lock, and he needs, I forget if it's Loke or DeVito to come in the ring to do the combo suplex lariat. And whenever the Carnage Crew is supposed to do it, he's like late for it. And so Moff and Whitmer, it's only like probably 3 seconds that they're just standing there with Moff basically hugging Tortuga from behind, but it just feels like forever, and you can tell Moff's like looking for like, come on, get in here. And then I think it's Loke. When Loke gets in the ring, he basically doesn't even do a lariat. He just like rushes it and basically does like a light push to Tortuga as Moff is suplexing him. So that was not a great looking spot. But and the other thing I felt kind of bad for was, like I said, the second half of the match, the Carnage Crew and Moff and Whitmer brawl on the outside. And at that point, I felt bad because it was like, basically it left the Ring Crew Express and the Outcast Killers to have a match in the ring. But you could tell that, like, from the reactions, like, less than half of the crowd was watching them. Like, everyone was watching the crowd. And I felt like these poor guys, these guys that work on the Ring Crew, they're trying to, like, get a foothold in this business. They finally get, like, some time where the spotlight's just on them, but really the spotlight's not even on them at all, even though that's, like, the finish of the match.
Well, I know what they were telling themselves while no one was watching them. It's a DVD product.
Let me just see. I'm just fine. Oh, and there was one other fuck up I want to mention this match. The ref fucked up a 3 count like we just saw a couple shows ago in the Havana Pitbulls Evans Strong tag match, where the ref dives down. It's a different ref. He dives down. He windmills his arm, so it looks like it's almost hits the mat, but it doesn't. But it looks like a 1 count. And then at least a couple fans must have thought it was a 1 count, because you can hear a couple voices count 1, 2, 3, and then we get a kick out what would have been 3.5, and then you see the ref immediately tell the timekeeper, like, don't ring the bell, that wasn't the finish. So refs, you got to be careful not to, when you dive down to, get on ready for the pin, you can't windmill your arm so wide, because you're really going to make it look like you're actually doing a 1 count. Not that it would have been a huge deal for this match, but still kind of and also, Matt, we didn't see much of it, but like, DeVito shoving that fan where they're out in the crowd, like, I didn't see that fan do anything wrong. Like, I was like, he didn't seem that close. Like, he was a little bit close, but they were in the crowd. And maybe, it was a quick camera cut, so maybe he did something otherwise. But that's become a theme on the show. There was a lot of negative wrestler fan interactions on the show, I felt.
Wow, I missed a lot of that then. So I'm curious to hear you point out the different examples.
Yeah. So After the match, the Carnage crew and Moff and Whitmer, they brought up the stairs onto the second floor of the Rexplex, and we get some shots of fans calmly walking by as the two teams brawl off in the distance, which also made me chuckle. And then we cut away, but not before we hear one fan offhandedly say, "I'm going to go play some paintball." Which, again,
yes, I did hear that. I didn't know if that was a fan or if that was just another guy at the Rexplex. Like, were they letting other people in?
Yeah, I don't know, because again, you have for people that don't watch, like you have to remember the Rexplex was a multi-purpose facility that was big enough to hold more than just Ring of Honor. So there could often be like other events, concerts, sports things happening in other parts of the Rexplex. Sometimes the sound would bleed over, and apparently, possibly paintball. I don't know, indoor paintball at the Rexplex, but
yeah, because apparently, paintball is not like a quick activity that really, like, that you could be like, yeah, I'll just do a quick paintball, then come back and watch the next match. Like, I don't know. I feel like but anyway, yeah, who knows?
Yeah. That seems like something you plan for. You don't just go, I'm going to spur of the moment paintball, but I guess that's what the Rexplex was offering. And who am I to argue with the Rexplex and their long history of business success? But next up, we had the Ring of Honor Pure title match. John Walters defeated Jimmy Rave by countout in 16 minutes, 51 seconds.
Another match broadcast on Ghana radio. I love the idea that, like, Ring of Honor was never, ever broadcast live except on the radio in Ghana.
It's like those old when I was watching like WWF pay-per-views in the 90s as a kid, where they'd be like, this is on radio WWF in like the armed forces. And I was like, man, I wish I was in the army. I could listen to WWF pay-per-views on the radio for free. And I just imagine that is in Ring of Honor's world, radio Ring of Honor is only available to Ghana.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely what happened.
One pink purplish streamer gets thrown in the ring for Rave, so we're still not at the level. We're not at the point yet where Rave gets the toilet paper, but we are getting between this and another recent show where people are starting to throw in like one streamer just to kind of dick around with Jimmy Rave. He angrily kicks out of the ring. Before the match, Todd Sinclair goes over the Pure title rules, and he says the final rule is that there's no managers or seconds at ringside, which I don't know if we've ever seen that before. So he kicks Nana and the Outcast Killers out. Nana freaks out as the crowd actually chants Nana, 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 hey, 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 goodbye, which
automatically a pun.
Yeah, exactly. It probably wasn't intentional, but works perfectly. And about this match, John Walters is another guy in the vein of a Matt Striker or a BJ Whitmer, where he's very mechanically sound. He can be in good matches, but he's just missing that something special. There's not one unique thing about him stylistically or his gimmick where he can really hang his hat on and say, this is what makes me more than just a very competent but somewhat bland wrestler. And I felt like this match was kind of a testament to that. It follows a structure of a lot of indie matches of the time, especially pure matches, where the first half is a lot of mat work, counters and reversals, and then at some point it's like they just flip a switch, and from the rest of the match on, it's a lot more higher impact offensive moves and near falls till the finish. And it's all solidly enjoyable, but it never really loses that vibe to me that something's like, something's missing. And there are some decent sequences of those counters and reversals, but at some points the crowd reacts, at some points they don't. And I thought maybe a troubling sign for John Walters is Jimmy Rave is one of the only real pure heels Ring of Honor had at this point, like one of the only guys that got almost complete boos. And at one point there's like a 50-50 let's go Walters, let's go Jimmy chant. And I felt like if you're a babyface champion and the most hated heel in the company, maybe at this point, like in terms of just no one usually like cheers him the way like a Low-Ki or a Homicide would, even when they're heels, like when he's getting 50-50 dueling chants in a match with you, it's probably not a coincidence that John Walters has to turn heel in the next show. But yeah, just okay, but nothing special. But I will say, the part of this match I really liked, I think I would have liked this match a lot more if they made the whole match out of it, was in the first half, Jimmy Rave's healing. Because I thought we would see a lot more of this when Nigel got his pure title run. But I thought it was one of the first times a guy really used like the idea of, oh, I'm a heel, I can use these pure title rules to my advantage. Like it's another early example of that, where he slaps and taunts Walters at one point to throwing a punch, and the ref obviously warns Walters because you can't throw a punch to the face in a pure title match, but you get a warning, and then the second one's a rope break. Then later on a corner break, when the ref is separating them and not looking, Rave claps his hands and then acts like Walters punched him again. And at that point, it does cost Walters a rope break. Rave at one point tells the ref to check the time, and then he throws a punch and hits Walters in the face with it, and the ref doesn't see it. And it's all really simple stuff, but to me, that was, when I talk about like this match or John Walters in general not having like something that really sets them apart, that stuff, that's the kind of stuff that gives a match character, and that's the part that I remember other than the finish. And so the finish is, I guess, the other really memorable part where Walters gets Rave in the sharpshooter. Rave crawls to the outside, but he's exhausted his rope break, so that doesn't save him. So Rave then crawls under the ropes. Walters still holds onto the sharpshooter even as they're going under the ropes. Walters holds on to it until they get to a 16 count, because remember, only pure title matches in Ring of Honor have a 20 count. Otherwise, Ring of Honor doesn't have countouts. When they get to about 16, Walters lets go of the hold, runs back in the ring, and Walters wins by countout. Rave can't get in the last 4 seconds. And I believe Gabe says, and I think he's right, it's the first countout win ever in Ring of Honor history. And that's the kind of finish where in another promotion you go, oh, what a chintzy, dumb finish. But because it's such a novelty that Ring of Honor has literally never had a countout finish, I believe, it's like, oh, that's a cool, neat little twist. But overall, just decent match. I didn't think it was anything special. Matt?
I liked it a lot more than you. I thought it was quite good. I wouldn't say great or anything, but I thought it was a real, a solidly good match. I also liked Rave's healing at the beginning. The only big heel spot of his that I didn't like was the spot where he slapped his hands and pretended that Walters punched him, where the ref took the rope break away, just because that just makes the ref seem too dumb. Like you should have to see a punch before you penalize someone for it. Yeah. But other than that, I loved the heel stuff, and I liked the intensity down the stretch. I really did like a lot of the sequences, like the part where Walters blocks a Rave Clash attempt and locks on the sharpshooter, and Rave reverses out of that, and instead of using a rope break. Which, I love anything where, like, one of the fun things about these matches are the clever ways guys avoid using the rope break. And he gets Walters in the Boston Crab. Then Walters reverses out of that and gets his own Boston Crab. And that gets Rave to use his final rope break. I really enjoyed that. I agree with you that it was a bad sign for Walters. I think the crowd really wanted Rave to win. Like, when he got his head scissors crossface on, the crowd popped really, really big for that. So I think people just wanted to see that title change, and I think people were really getting into Rave. I think even down the street, like even as the months went on, the booing Rave, I still don't think Rave really had true heel heat even at his peak. I think that he was like someone that people had fun booing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's ROH. I don't know if you could really ever defeat that concept.
Even just getting heel heat consistently like that was a victory in Ring of Honor. Because, like you just said, it was really hard to get heel heat in Ring of Honor.
Right, exactly. At one point, Punk says that Rave is going bald, and I'm like, it's 16 years later, and I don't think he's bald. So
his hair is definitely thinned and receded, but not close to this time period.
Yeah, I mean, listen, in 16 years, he's still got a full head of hair. Not a full head of hair, maybe. I don't know, actually. I should go back and look. He has hair on his head, is what I'm saying. So I don't think he was going bald 16 years ago. That's all I'm trying to say. But yeah, there's a lot of cool reversals. Walters did a cool reversal into a sharpshooter that got a good pop. And I like, Rave rolls to the outside, but he's out of rope breaks, so they roll all the way to the floor, but Walters keeps the sharpshooter on the outside. And I like that, Rave, to get out, he climbs up the guardrail, and they basically fall down, but Walters won't release it. And that's when Walters gets the win. I just thought it was clever. There were good sequences. I agree with you about the heel stuff, but I also just liked the way they built to the finish. You're right, Walters, needed a change, and they were going to give him one at the next show. But I thought they did a good job with this match.
Yeah, I had no problems with it, but I can see. I think those are the kind of matches where I feel like when I like something more than you, it's often like just a really dumb, sloppy spot fest. I'll like a little more than you, and for you, it's more like something with like a lot of good, solid mat wrestling. And not that I don't like that stuff. I like that stuff quite a bit, but I feel like that's the kind of match or just really solid, good, like kind of straightforward wrestling. Maybe sometimes I give it a little lower, but yeah, definitely a decent match. And next we cut to a clip of the last. Oh, I just wanted to mention first. I forgot. I want to point out all these weird. This is one of the lower intensity fan interactions, but after the match, Walters flips off and he really jaws with one fan who is daring Walters to hit him. And again, I felt like that's not a great sign, especially because Walters was like really getting into it with this fan. And like, again, he's supposed to be, I think, a babyface at this point.
They also lingered on it way too long.
Yeah, and again, that's another one of those double DV type things where it felt like most standard Ring of Honor shows, you don't see a second of that. Instead, they show like every second of that here. So next we cut to a clip of the last Ring of Honor match of the Briscoes with a voiceover from Gabe telling us that Low Ki's post-match kick on that night when he was wrestling, I believe, Jay, might have cost the Briscoes their career. Gabe's voiceover here really could have used a take two because he misnames his own show Testing the Limits instead of Testing the Limit. And he has a couple awkward pauses and stutters where it sounds like he's just kind of making it up as he goes, and it really feels like it wasn't a very long clip. You could have done a take two. But anyway, he recaps the health of them. He says, Mark Briscoe was jumped by the Havana Pitbulls after the match in the parking lot, and no cameras were there, so we never got to see it. And he says, meanwhile, Jay has post-concussion syndrome from Low Ki's kick to the head. Gabe says he hopes one day we'll see the Briscoes back, but for now, it looks like they've been forced to retire way too soon. So, again, if you want to talk about the attention to detail, like, I feel like a lot of wrestling companies, when it turned, like, they were built in the middle of this Briscoes Rottweilers feud, a lot of companies, when guys just left and wouldn't come back, or, in this case, Mark got hurt and they decided maybe to do other stuff with their lives for a while, like, they would just not tell you and hope you forgot about it. Again, Gabe went to the trouble of actually making a segment being like, this is why this feud isn't continuing. This is why, you're not seeing the Briscoes back. Like, they would go the extra, I wouldn't say mile, but the extra step that some promotions wouldn't, to just make sure to dot the I's and cross the T's.
Yeah, attention to detail was definitely something that was a strong suit for Gabe's booking, especially at the time.
So that brings us to a big match pretty early in the card, the number one contenders match for the Ring of Honor World title. Winner gets the title shot, or do they? Because there is no winner. Austin Aries and Low Ki go to a 20-minute time limit draw. Matt, 20-minute time limit draw. We can talk about just the weirdness of that booking, but I guess I would say probably the larger, more interesting, although that's interesting, but the larger issue is Austin Aries and Low Ki. That's a pretty big match. What do you think? How do you think it turned out?
This is the third time limit draw in 4 shows, isn't it? For ROH. So that's interesting. And yeah, 20 minutes for a number one contenders match seems too short. Remember when they used to have the number one contenders trophy? I don't think those matches had 20-minute time limits. In fact, sometimes they main evented cards. But that's neither here nor there. I thought this match was darn good. I mean, I guess you could argue, given the two guys, that there was you could say it was slightly disappointing, but I really liked it. I liked that. They never got into like high intensity gear, but it was solid throughout. They did a lot of mat work at the beginning, and then it was sort of a lot of Aries picks up the pace. Low Ki slows down the pace. That was sort of how it went. But Low Ki introduced some offense on this show that became sort of like a centerpiece of his heel offense for the next year or two. Like he does the first ever Tree of Woe double stomp, which the crowd explodes from. Like they just thought it was awesome. And it really is an amazing spot the first time you see it. Because when you don't see that coming, like a guy's in the Tree of Woe, he's trying to get out, and a guy just like jumps and stomps on him and knocks him back down. Like that's a pretty freaking amazing spot. And I remember the first time I saw that spot, it wasn't on this card, but it was the first time I saw that spot, I was like, holy shit, like that looks devastating. And Aries sold it like he was dead. But Loki only got a 2 count because he waited a while before he covered. Aries, I thought looked really good in this. His missile tope was just awesome, the one that he did in this match, and Key kind of comes back with like a really killer chop. At one point, Aries does a crucifix bomb, but Key blocks it, and Aries turns it into a sunset flip, and Loki comes back with what else? An eye poke. Loki, he fights out of another sunset flip attempt with a double stomp. So I thought I kind of marked this match as the debut of Loki's like double stomp centric offense. He goes for his top rope double stomp, but Aries moves. Loki hits another eye poke, but Aries comes back with like a really impactful sidewalk slam, does his power elbow combo. Loki does an inverted atomic drop, and Loki charges at Aries, but Aries catches him with a spinning forearm, grabs Key's head, jumps over the top rope, clotheslining Loki's neck on the top. Then Aries goes for a quebrada. Key gets his feet up. He does a bridging German suplex for 2. Aries goes for the 450, but Key gets his knees up and gets a 2 count. And what I liked about this is, at this point, the ring announcer announces that there is 1 minute remaining in the match. So, like, you can actually get that sense of urgency for the last minute, as opposed to in some of these other matches. So Aries was up Key got him up in the crush rush position. Aries reversed it into the crucifix bomb. The ref's counting down from 30 seconds, and Aries, at that point, he's taking his time, which I didn't really like. But he hits the 450. The ref counts 2. But as he counts 3, the bell rings, so the time limit is up and the match is a draw. I don't love when the finish is too perfect like that. Like the bell rings right as the referee's about to count 3. That's a little bit too cute for me. But I really enjoyed the match. I thought that, they're both good wrestlers, and they both had good performances. You felt like after watching it, they could do more and they could do better. I don't think they ever totally get to, but I thought this was good.
This match, I like this match. If I had to give it a rating, I'd probably give it like 3.5 stars, maybe, give or take. But like,
I think that's fair.
I thought it was like a really interesting match because I think on a lot of the shows we've been talking about like heel Loki and how different he is from his 2002 face Loki run, where he's really pared down his offense, and like heel Loki is about like he's not gonna give you everything that 2002 face Loki was. That's not his character. He's 2002 Loki gives you all this fast-paced matches that are dense with action with lots of flashy state-of-the-art offense. 2004 Loki isn't going to give you everything he can do. He's going to do some things, but he's not going to give you everything. And I think like a great kind of microcosm, something that sums that up, is there an exchange where Aries is starting like this back and forth chop battle, and you think, oh, they're really going to go to town, and Loki just cuts him off with an eye poke. And, like 2002 Loki does the chop battle. 2004 Loki does the eye poke. And some people are going to really hate that. I felt like the first 7 minutes were pretty slow. Like it was a lot of low-key body scissors and a lot of stuff on the mat. And in fact, like the first couple minutes especially, like there's a lot of stalling and looking to the crowd. Like I think after those first 7 minutes, if I had told someone that was watching this match with me, like these guys are going to a draw, the people would probably say, oh yeah, definitely. Like this is going to be like a 30-minute or 60-minute draw. And I would have to tell them, no, like this is going to a 20-minute draw, because they were wrestling in the first 7 minutes like they had hours of time to go on this. But I felt like after that, they fit a really good pace where this was probably the most high impact offense that Loki has had in this heel run. Like they do a good job of Loki is definitely, like you said, there's this flow of Aries makes a comeback and then Loki slows it back down. He keeps working over the midsection. He does stuff like body scissors and then Aries comes back. But like you said, even though this isn't the first time we've seen Loki do the double stomp, I think this is the match, like you said, at least in Ring of Honor, where he really establishes that like he's the double stomp guy now, because he does the tree of woe double stomp, like you said, gets a huge reaction. He tries to do just his top rope one we've seen before, which is his finisher at this time, and Aries avoids it. And he even does one, I think, where Aries is doing some kind of like sunset flip type thing, and he just does that one where he stops the guy from like flipping him over and just puts his hand on his chest and then jumps and double stomps right from the mat to the chest. So you get basically 3 variations attempted or executed here. And I felt like this match was really good in that I liked how these two played off each other. Like, I think both guys have really good, snappy, like, snug, high-impact offense. And I felt like a lot of times low-key, he just, not even because he intends it, like, it can be easy to get eaten up a bit by low-key, but I felt like matches like this are really cool where you got a guy that will kind of give as good as he gets to low-key. And I felt like there was a couple points in this match where, like, Aries is going for something and low-key's just kind of like, no, like, he's not going to do it, or, like, he's not taking him seriously, and then Aries will hit the move anyway, and then low-key will sell. Like, there was a little bit of, like, low-key's not respecting this guy enough. And I felt like the whole way they worked the match, it made Aries really feel like the underdog without making it was like a different kind of underdog than Jay Lethal matches. Like, Jay Lethal matches, not tonight, but of a lot of matches of this era, he sells and sells and sells, and then he makes a comeback at the end, whether he wins or loses. And that's a great way of doing things. But there's a different way, and I don't think it's better or worse, where, again, going back to what you said, like, Aries makes a little comeback, low-key slows it down, Aries fights out of it, where he's kind of fighting the whole way through. And it made Aries, it feels like an underdog where you're starting to get sympathy for him, which I feel is kind of important in a heel-heel match to get sympathy on somebody. But you never feel like you never feel like when you're watching a Jay Lethal match where, like, oh, Aries is just like 3 levels below this guy, and he's just like he's a fighter, but man, he's in there tough. Like, Aries is never on defense long enough where you just feel like he's like a level below low-key. And yeah, just a lot of really cool moments. I thought low-key's midsection work, Aries selling wasn't the greatest of it, but I thought his midsection work was really good. That one moment where Aries goes for the lion salt, but Key gets his feet up, like, Aries took it like it just almost impaled him. Like, it looked really gnarly. Like, Key kicks Aries really hard in the back at one point. Aries hits a really hard, loud sounding, like, spinning forearm to Key, like, going back to that point where I feel like their offense really matches up well. So then the finish, like you said, I kind of disagree completely about the finish in the sense of, so for those who don't know, like Matt basically said it, but just to recap, there's no time keys until the final minute. Bobby Cruz says, 1 minute left. And at that point, I felt like Aries especially was very lackadaisical. Like, he wasn't really showing a sense of urgency. And then that final 10 seconds, even then, he's kind of climbing up slowly to do the 450, but he hits the 450 with 4 seconds left. The ref is right in position, and they do the 1-2, and low-key kicks out at like 2.9 right before like the last second. And I actually thought that was really, even though I know what you're saying, it's really kind of fakey feeling, like, to have it timed that perfectly. I just really admired how perfect the timing was, except this is what I didn't like about it. I felt like the real finish that it should have been Aries hits the 450 with like 3 seconds left instead of 4. The ref counts the 2, and then time limit expires, and you don't know if low-key would have kicked out or not, because that way Aries still has, it almost is like Aries won. You can still give him that vibe that he won without having to have low-key lose. But instead, like, low-key kicks out of the 450, which is it takes a little of the drama away, I feel like you could have had an even cooler finish if you just delayed everything 1 second. But
yeah. I agree. I pretty much, like I said, I don't like the contrivance, but I think you're right that would have been a little better if you're going to do it that way.
So I guess we should, again, just talk about the booking of this. This is a number 1 contenders match. And I guess there's 2 things we should talk about that are weird about this. First off, we talked about a little bit off the bat, but like a 20-minute draw for a number 1 contenders match. So to go into what you were saying earlier, a couple shows ago we had a 15-minute draw between Nigel McGuinness and Chad Collier, even though there's lots of undercard not lots, but a fair number of matches in Ring of Honor on the undercard that have gone longer than 15 minutes. Then we get the 60-minute world title draws. I can understand those. 60 minutes world title, that makes sense sometimes. But then this 20 minutes for a number 1 contender match. Matt, I went into Cage Match just to confirm something. it's either 2 or 3 shows after this one of the 3rd anniversary show tours. There are 2 matches on that card, Alex Shelley versus CM Punk and Jimmy Rave versus AJ Styles, neither for a title or number 1 contendership. They both go over 20 minutes. Hell, fucking low-key Bryan Danielson on the very next show, which isn't for a title or number 1 contendership, goes a few, not very much, but like a little bit over 20 minutes. So it just feels so arbitrary. Like, I realize, you know, on a card like this, you didn't want to go that long, but then it goes to my second thing, which I'm going to ask you, which is, why do you think, knowing that Aries is getting the world title shot on the next show, knowing that, you know, he's going to win the world title, knowing that, yes, they do a low-key Aries rematch, but it's not for a long time, like, relatively long time, I guess, why do you do a time limit draw? Like, these are my only 2 thoughts, and then I'll just give it to you, which is my 2 theories are, you have to remember, low-key left Ring of Honor last year, and the idea was Ring of Honor was going to wrap up low-key's run, and they wanted him to lose to Homicide. Their side of the story, which they gave in the newsletters, is that low-key agreed, and then later on he changed his mind, said, I want to do like a 15-minute draw, and Ring of Honor said, no, fuck no, we're not doing that, and then they just said, you know, low-key will never be back, and we can't come to an agreement. So my feeling is, knowing that, they either low-key wouldn't lose to Aries and they still wanted this match anyway, or they didn't even trust low-key to ask him if he'd lose, because otherwise I don't get why you do this finish.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right. I think Loki did, you know, I don't even think they asked him, honestly. I think they were just like, when they booked the match, they probably planned on doing that finish. I think they were like, well, Loki doesn't like to lose. We want to keep him strong anyway, because we do eventually want to get to that match, even though they kind of reported that they didn't. I'm sure, like, the way they built it up, I'm sure they did, of Loki against Joe at some point, and Loki for the title at some point, in a title rematch. But also, but they still want to do the match. They figured they didn't have other guys that made sense for these 2 to wrestle on this show. They wanted to get Aries to the point where he was able to, you know, have the title shot against Joe at Final Battle. And they thought it would be a good match, and they were just like, and also this was during an era where Gabe was trying to be cute with finishes. Between the time limit draws on the other shows, between the count out finish on this show, he's clearly trying to just like be creative with finishes, and this was just another example. I think he just didn't think it would be a big deal.
And it's really interesting, the booking, because clearly, I don't know when Gabe decided that Aries was going to be the guy to beat Joe and be the next world champion. But if you look at this second half of the year, you know, Gabe really put in some work to have Aries win or at least look really good against basically every top name that wasn't Homicide before he faced Joe, because, you know, he has the finals in Testing the Limit with Danielson where he loses, but that's his big breakout match. Then he beats Danielson at Testing the Limit in the rematch. You know, he loses to Punk, but then he wins the rematch against Punk. And now here, even low key, you know, he gets a draw, which for a lot of guys, it's about as good as you can get with low key. And, you know, Gabe basically, like, you know, put him over almost everybody but Homicide before he got to Aries.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely, it definitely seemed like there were at least a few months where Gabe knew that Aries was going to be the guy.
So I thought this was an interesting quote, knowing what's coming on the next show. Mike Johnson wrote, another performer you can expect a big push for in the next few months is Austin Aries, who is being set up as a top-level guy in the company after his bouts with CM Punk, Low-Key, and Bryan Danielson. Aries is in a similar position to where AJ Styles was in 2002, in that he'll likely break out in a huge way, barring industry, in 2005. And I believe at the same time, the Observer reports something similar, like expect Austin Aries to get a big push in 2005 in Ring of Honor. So clearly they were telling people that Aries is going to get a big push, which is interesting because it's kind of tipping their hand a little. I mean, it was still a shock, so I don't think it really tipped the hand. But I wouldn't have wanted to say that at all at this point. If I knew what was coming, I would be like, yeah, Aries, you know, he's a good guy. We'll see what happens. But like, apparently they were just telling everybody, like, yeah, Aries, we're going to push this guy to the moon.
Well, maybe they thought it was like a good misdirection. Like, oh, he's going to get a big push in 2005, which means that like the world title shot that he loses will be the beginning of him being in that rung. You know, and like that's like, and they're almost like, oh, you know, we're hiding it in plain sight that he's going to actually win the title here.
Yeah,
Actually, that probably is what it was.
That'd be definitely like definitely like interesting kind of mental chess to think that deep. Like, oh, they'll think he's going to get like a big world title in October 2005, and they won't realize he's booked to win it next show. But
this is Gabe Sapolsky we're talking about, the chess master.
Everyone knows that very well-known nickname for Dave Sapolsky, the chess master. After the match, the crowd chants for 5 more minutes, and Gary Michael Capetta comes out in a classic dad sweater. I love Gary's sweaters. Always excited to see what he's decided to put on this show.
Now that we all know how problematic Bill Cosby is and what a monster he turned out to be, Gary Michael Capetta is now the king of sweaters.
Yeah, and instead of Cosby sweater, we now have to say it's a Capetta sweater.
A Capetta.
Gary says he was sent out there by Ring of Honor management, but then I love this. He actually he has to be honest. He says, actually, I was standing there with Gabe and we were watching the match. So he tries to act all official. He's like, you guys all know this. I was just with Gabe over there. And Gary says the ruling is this match will continue for 5 more minutes if the fans want it. The crowd gets super loud and excited. We get a much louder 5 more minutes chant that we got right when the draw originally happened. Key grabs the mic. Gabe on commentary at this point says nothing good ever comes when he grabs the mic, which I thought was a nice, cute little wink to people that knew that Key had that comment edited out at Ring of Honor Completion, where Ring of Honor Reborn Completion, where he had that line about Rob Feinstein touching little boys that they had to like mute out. So I thought that was a nice little acknowledgement of that. Maybe I'm reading in. You know what, Matt? He's the chess master. I'm sure he meant that line on purpose. Key calls Aries a boy at this point, and he says he asks the crowd, do they want to see 5 more minutes? Key asks Aries, does he want 5 more minutes? He asks the ref, does he want 5 more minutes? They all want it. Key says he signed off on a 20-minute match, and so none of you get a damn thing. He leaves to booze. He gets in a fan's face on the way out. Again, more fan confrontation. And then once Key is gone, Aries gets a little round of applause. Reading the notes here, Dave Meltzer wrote from the live reports, crowd hated this. He's talking about the finish, not the whole match. Just the draw not continuing. And he goes, some blamed it for killing the next match where Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero kept the tag titles over Nigel McGuinness and Chad Collier in a good match with no crowd reaction. So, Matt, I'll get to my opinion on that in just a minute. But moving on, actually right now, because the next match, Ring of Honor tag title match, the Havana Pitbulls of Ricky Reyes and Rocky Romero defeated Chad Collier and Nigel McGuinness in 16 minutes, 25 seconds when Reyes pinned Collier after they hit the demolition decapitation style knee drop. So, Matt, about halfway through this match, I was thinking I was going to give this like above average or good, like a 3-star, 3.25. I was enjoying it decently. It still had a lot of the vibe I've come to negatively associate with Pitbull's matches, that feeling that they're not really about anything, that something's kind of missing, that they're almost just spamming the same few moves over and over like it's a video game. But it's mostly Chad Collier and Nigel McGuinness in control, and I like both those guys, so it's fun watching them do stuff. And then the Havana Pitbulls isolate Nigel McGuinness, and it is one of the most heatless Ring of Honor matches I've ever heard. I've never heard, at certain points in this match, the crowd is just 750 people fucking silent. No one gives a shit. Apart from one really great sequence during the heat segment where Nigel does the headstand and Rocky Romero is confused and he runs the ropes trying to like knock off Nigel's balance and stuff, but ends up getting trapped anyway. Apart from that, it's the Pitbulls tagging in and out and doing the most basic, bland offense with no real focus. So much of Reyes' offense in particular seems to be either just clubbing forearms to the back, stiff kicks to the midsection, or random attempts at an armbar and just rinse, wash, and repeat those 3 things. There's no charisma. They're not really using selling and psychology to tell a story. They have a few cool spots, but even there, they're not up to the standards of a lot of other acts in Ring of Honor. And the crowd is just, again, dead. And then when I was already getting annoyed with this, Matt, Nigel, finally, after a few minutes of being isolated, he goes to make the hot tag. And how does he finally break the control and make a hot tag? He just trips Ricky Reyes by the leg and walks over and makes the tag. Like, there is no huge fight comeback, no big reversal. It's just like, oh, it's time to make a hot tag. He trips a leg, he tags, and as a result, we get one of the most heatless hot tags I have ever heard. And no payoff, no imagination. That's the thing I would say about this. For the second half of this match on, there is no imagination other than that cool headstand sequence. And then again, the finishing sequence, it's fine. It's nothing special. We get a little interference from Julius Smokes distracting Collier that gets him to break his Texas Cloverleaf finisher and go address him on the apron, and then they end up losing. It's an average match, but I am so tired of average Havana Pitbulls matches. They're getting so many opportunities. They have so many good opponents. They're getting so much ring time, like just the lengths of their matches are long, and they get so little out of so much that they're given. It's just I'm done with the Pitbulls, man. I'm done with them.
I feel you. Like I think I mostly agree with your points. I just didn't feel it as strongly as you, if that makes sense. Like I definitely agree that when Nigel and Collier were working on offense and stuff, it was very fun, and the Pitbulls were considerably less fun, and the match, got a lot less interesting. I definitely thought they did not do enough to build to that Collier tag late in the match, for sure. But I did think there were some cool moves throughout, and I thought it was an okay match. It was a solid match, I would say. The Pitbulls, I don't think they've been good. I don't understand why they've gotten so much time with the tag team titles at this point when there are other better teams. But I don't hate them to the extent that you did at this point. I do think that like Collier and Romero had good chemistry. Like they were kind of playing off that match they had at Death Before Dishonor. And I thought that was good. I also like Punk talking about Collier. He said, Collier's fun to hang out with because he'll, quote, turn around and threaten to slug a grandma. So apparently this is what CM Punk thinks is fun, is people threatening to beat up old ladies. I guess grandmas don't have to be old, right? You could be a grandma at like 40. But there were some, like I said, there were some fun spots. McGinnis grabs a leg, Collier grabs an arm, and they move like to the next limb and go all the way around and just like do like holds and stuff on them. And Punk calls it a technical wrestling version of the Garfin Stomp, which I think is a good way to describe it. And like as I was watching this, I'm like, McGinnis and Collier could have been a damn good team because they already had like good stuff going with the two of them.
I even like Collier has like I forgot to mention that part where Nigel does the headstand and like Romero's trying to like break it up by running the ropes and upsetting his balance, and then Collier runs on the apron and like holds on to him. Like they have like cute little chemistry like that already. Yeah,
I agree. Speaking of the headstand thing, you said Romero won't fall for it. He tries shaking the ropes, but that won't work, and he just waits. And eventually Nigel drops down, but then goes back up, and that's when he suckers Romero in and hits the Tower of London, which at the time Gabe just called, High Impact. So apparently
he still doesn't have a name for it.
Yes. Collier did not do the toilet flush, as far as I could tell in this match, or at least it wasn't called. There was also another funny call late in the match. While Nigel's on the floor, Romero hits like a big off the apron, like a big like running, like almost like crotch splash, like Fez press thing. And Gabe goes, he gives McGinnis the chair. So I'm like, I guess it's the chair. I guess that's what it's called. I didn't know that. But yeah, no, I agree with you about that the Pitbulls sucked the life out of the match. But I thought that Nigel and Collier gave enough life in that it was, I didn't dislike it, I guess is what I would say. I think it had enough good points that I generally had a net positive opinion about the match.
I will save I think I will have an opportunity of my larger Pitbulls rant on the next show. I don't know if I hate them, but I would say I haven't been more disappointed in an act in Ring of Honor on our rewatch. Like the gulf between what everyone praised them from the newsletters to their fellow wrestlers to fans online to how they're booked and what I actually get. Like Matt, I'll say this. We've been relatively close together on our opinions of the Pitbulls like matches, but I think thinking about that, like how many pitbulls matches, forget how good they are, how many pitbulls matches have you watched in Ring of Honor where you can come away going, they were the more entertaining part of that match? Like, to me, almost every time I watch one of their matches, no matter what I feel about it, I go like, the other team was the more entertaining part of the match.
No, I would agree with that. I think I'm reticent to insult them too much because I like the guys individually, especially, Romero's obviously had a good career, but
well, that's the other thing. Romero's great. Like, he's been great for years. Like, that's part of what makes me so frustrated and, like, confused because, like, they've both done stuff I've liked after this,
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And,
but,
and like you said, the one match where Romero teamed with Homicide, he looked a lot better. And the Reyes singles match against Samoa Joe was a lot better than any of the Pitbull's performances.
I also thought it was interesting on commentary. They really sold this the challengers hard because Punk called Chad Collyer the most underrated guy in the Ring of Honor roster, which Punk, usually when he makes comments like that, he's seems pretty genuine, like when he goes out of his way like that for someone. And Gabe called Nigel the fastest rising star in Ring of Honor. So they were heaping a bunch of praise on those guys. And I guess the one spot I also forgot to mention is Chad Collyer does a tope and he snags his legs on the ropes and, like, lucky he didn't, like, really hurt himself bad.
Yeah.
And this was the match that really confirmed to me that crash and burn. I suspected it before, but clearly that is Gabe's line he only uses for legit botches because he just screams crash and burn, and it's his code for the botch in case you didn't see that it was a botch. But after the match, a ringside fan moons Julius Smokes. We actually see the guy's ass.
Oh shit! I don't know if I was looking away for a second. I did not notice that. I got to go back. I got to go back and see this guy. I got to go back and see this guy's ass.
When I'm talking about fan interactions, this fan jaws with Smokes for a fair bit of time, and then he actually, and we see ass, he moons him, and then Smokes has to be held back along with his candy cane. And
I noticed Smokes like jerking off the candy cane. That part I definitely noticed. He did that a few times tonight.
I thought that was great because, like, we've seen him before holding a baseball bat and jerking that off. So I love the idea that, like, this is the Christmas version. Like, even though it's the holiday season, if he has something long and thin, he's going to jerk it off. So I thought that was funny. I'm a child. But next up, it is time for the great debate. That is what they sold this for. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but bear in mind, they sold this segment as a great debate. That was, I think they plugged it on the website. They hyped it up. I think when they did the announcement on the last show, that this is going to be the great managerial debate. So Jim Cornette is back in Ring of Honor. First time in a long time. He walks to the ring, racket in hand. He's playing to the crowd. He seems happy as a clam. He's real babyface energy to start off with. And the first thing he says is he asks someone to kick Vince Russo's ass for some reason I couldn't make out. And I just wrote, because of course that's the first thing Jim Cornette says. Cornette notes that it's been
Isn't it funny how little has changed in 16 years?
I was going to say that like Vince Russo, what this made me realize is that like Vince Russo should be sending like Christmas cards to Kenny Omega and Joey Janela because like I feel like Cornette talks less about Vince Russo now, but for like 15 years, that was where most of Cornette's anger was aimed at. And I feel like the AEW guys have basically taken a lot of the heat away from Russo, but
it does feel like the hate of the AEW guys is at least a little bit shtick, while the hate of Russo is like 100% genuine.
I think even that one, I think it was genuine, but over time it probably became shtick when he realized that he could make money off of it.
True.
I think with Cornette, probably all of his hatred to some level is shtick and some level is real. Like I think he takes things he really is annoyed by, and then he just keeps playing it up until he can sell a t-shirt to you, because as we recently learned, he is apparently making a lot of money selling t-shirts.
Right. I think the Russo stuff though was more personal because they worked together and had issues in that capacity. But yes, you're right.
No, yeah, I agree. Yeah, that because like I don't think anyone in AEW has done something like, for example, like I know Jim Cornette was really mad about like Vince Russo booking WCW an angle that made fun of Jim Ross's Bell's palsy. So like, yeah, that would make it more personal than anything AEW has done to him, I think. So, or said about him, I mean.
Right.
Anyway, Cornette notes that it's been a year since the last time he was here, I guess, in the city. And you could hear at this point a fan loudly scream, "What's up with that?" Which I think this one fan was really like, he wanted answers, Matt. We needed Gary Michael Capetta to come back out and get the answers for this one. But
that reminds me of like an Andy Samberg SNL bit, right? That song, like, I don't even remember what, like, but he was talking about like bad things happening in the world. And he was like, "What's up with that?" God, I gotta find that bit again.
So Cornette says he's glad to be here. He said, and he's glad to see everyone, but he says there's one reason that got him to return to Ring of Honor. He says he challenged Ring of Honor to fulfill the one remaining goal he had in his wrestling career. He wanted to stand in the ring with the only person who has ever stood in his way of being proclaimed the greatest wrestling manager of all time. Jim says that he has a lot of respect for Bobby Heenan. He patterned himself after Bobby Heenan, and he considers him a legend. And then he just introduces Bobby Heenan. Bobby Heenan gets a big reaction. Bobby Heenan comes out, and he's basically dressed in an all-leather suit with a black shirt and a black tie, it's like leather pants, leather jacket, then black shirt and black and white tie, and it's a look, man. I'll put it that way.
Did Bobby Heenan ever rock leather pants in the 80s?
I don't know. What this looked like to me is like if you told like a 15-year-old you've got to dress up for a wedding and mom's not going to like help you choose your outfit, like this is what a 15-year-old would pick. Like, well, leather's cool, and black everything, he
was Bono as the Fly.
The original Fly, Bobby Heenan. We've come up with two secret histories between chess master Gabe Sapolsky and the original Fly, Bobby Heenan.
That's right.
Crowd doesn't chant original Fly, unfortunately. They chant Bobby and then Weasel. Someone throws a streamer in the ring because we were talking before the show, like this was the era in Ring of Honor where the streamers really started to get big, and it felt like a lot of shows you would see a fan that would just get tired of waiting for the main event and they would just decide to throw a streamer in during a random match. We're like, hey, this is how I'm going to express my excitement. Random streamer.
They were like, if I have a heart attack before the end of the show, I'm not going to get to throw these streamers, so I might as well throw them while I still have the chance.
Yeah. Cornette says Ring of Honor fans respect legends. He tells Bobby that he's been a fan of his since he watched him at the age of 9. He said, I watched you getting tossed around by Dick the Bruiser. Jim again says that he patterned himself after Heenan, and he says he's a fan of Bobby, and he shakes his hand. Bobby responds. He says that he's a fan of Jim's, and he says something to a fan and at ringside at this point that I can't understand, and he calls him a moron, which gets a big laugh. Bobby asks the crowd to excuse his speech because he's recovering from cancer. At this point, Bobby earnestly puts over how much the fans have always meant to him, and he puts over Ring of Honor as one hell of an organization. Heenan wishes that he could manage again one more time, but he's had a great life, and he thanks the fans for everything. He goes to leave very quickly, so this speech from Heenan did not take very long. Cornette asks him to get back in the ring. Cornette says he has another thing to say to Bobby, and he notes that he did some managing in Ring of Honor, and he got his beak wet managing again here in Ring of Honor, and he feels like Ring of Honor is his home for him right now as a manager. He says so many fans over the years have come to him, and they've complimented him, but they've always ended the compliment by saying he reminds them of Bobby Heenan. Cornette at this point, he starts getting angry. He really flips an emotional switch where he goes from real good face energy to, you can tell, getting a little more sinister and angry. He completely changes his vocal tone at this point. He says he's heard that for 22 years and he's getting sick of it. He tells the crowd to bear with him for a damn second. Like, he just says that to the crowd and he gets really some real boos. And all he does is he says, bear with me for a damn second. And he gets boos at this point. Jim says that after 22 years of being compared to Bobby, of being beneath Heenan, of hearing people tell him that he's great, but he's not as great as Bobby Heenan, he wants to ask a question to Bobby face to face. Jim says Vince couldn't kill Bobby, WCW couldn't kill him, cancer couldn't kill him, so what the hell is it going to take to get Bobby the hell out of his ring? Jim wants him to roll over and go home, drop dead, turn to dust, anything that lets Cornette be the guy and stop being compared to Heenan. Cornette says Heenan doesn't have the good decency to die and get it over with. Heenan wants to know what's the matter with Jim. He has no problem with Jim. Jim then says, did you have throat cancer or ear cancer? You just heard what's wrong with me. Cornette asks him again, what will it take for Heenan to fade into the sunset like an old gunfighter? Cornette asks if it's going to have to get rough. At this point, Cornette heals on the fans for shaking his hands after picking their noses, but mostly for the fact that they always tell him that he's second best to Heenan. Cornette asks Heenan yet again, what's going to take to get him out of his Ring of Honor ring? Heenan says he'll never leave this business and says now that Ring of Honor is here, he might stay till he's 155. Big Bobby chant at this point. Cornette takes off his jacket and says if this was any other two people, this is where a wrestling angle might start. Maybe someone would get busted open. Jim says he's not going to hit Bobby with a racket. He's not going to make him bleed. He says, and then at this point we see Roderick Strong and Jack Evans come to the ring, and Cornette then just says that's what they're here for. They grab Heenan, but almost immediately Jimmy Jacobs and a chair-wielding Colt Cabana chase them away to a big pop. Heenan takes off his jacket, and he says if Cornette thinks he's the greatest manager, he can take his two goons. Bobby will take these two guys, and they can manage opposite sides of a match tonight. Cornette accepts and says Bobby Heenan will rule the day he came to Ring of Honor. Bobby says he'll see them later, punk. So, Matt, I thought this was Cornette's best promo by far in Ring of Honor. I thought he did a really good thing of going from like real earnest babyface to real like angry, bitter heel. He got a good heel heat. I felt like he was a very unselfish promo where he really like he framed everything as Heenan's better than me, and knowing what the finish of the match is going to be, like he really, like the whole point of this night is that you come away thinking that Bobby Heenan's the greatest and Cornette is second greatest. So he, some people, that doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I feel like some people in wrestling would have more of an ego where they wouldn't even want to do a storyline like this. The one thing I thought I stood out was this was billed as a great debate. It was not a debate at all, and it really did feel like Cornette was doing an angle, and Bobby Heenan was more like not that he wasn't into it, but more like Bobby Heenan didn't feel like he was here to cut a promo and be like into a big wrestling angle. More like he was legit there just to really graciously accept applause from the fans and tell them like, I'm glad to be here and see you guys. And like when Cornette was starting to like cut that really heavy promo, like saying, I wish you would die and stuff like that. And all Heenan's comeback is like, what's your problem? And even when Cornette's like, I just told you what my problem is, Heenan again is like, I don't know what your problem is. Like Heenan, I don't know, he just didn't seem to be on the same page as Cornette, I would say.
I see what you're saying, but I don't really think it was a problem, honestly. Like
and I don't blame Bobby Heenan. I think this segment was still really good, but I just feel like Bobby Heenan almost felt like he wasn't there. Like I just felt like, especially for something that billed as a great managerial debate, I feel like Bobby Heenan didn't really come prepared for a debate and didn't really want to have a debate. He just wanted to show up, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone there was like, man, I can't wait for this debate. I think that they were like, I want to see, Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette together. Like, that's cool. And considering what they did in the match, which we'll get to later, like, I think it was plenty sufficient. Bobby Heenan wasn't, he was recovered from, his initial battle with cancer, but still not, fully, fully healthy. He couldn't really, speak in the way that he always wanted to. He also never really had a lot of experience playing a babyface character. That's another thing. I think he was sort of just let Cornette have the moment. And as far as Cornette goes, I think Cornette, you can accuse him of a lot of things, but being a selfish performer is not one of them. He was always willing to make himself look like the butt of all the jokes, to be the fool, like the loser. Like, so he never had a problem with that. The one thing that I maybe thought was weird, I mean, not a big deal at all, but just like that Generation Next is suddenly like, doing Cornette's dirty work for him, just because like they're, Cornette's an old dude too, and they're not usually on board with just like, aligning with them. But again, that's a minor thing. These segments are always better for the live crowd than they are on DVD because they're just, special appearances kind of. But I think this one held up on tape better than I expected 16 years later. I think it still felt like a special moment, and I thought it was nice to see.
Yeah, and I think there is some first off, I thought that's a great point I didn't think of about Generation Next. You can kind of say, well, Generation is all about taking guys' spots, but then like you said, Generation Next generally, one of their big things has been attacking veterans. So it's kind of – and it also just the combination of like Jack Evans and Jim Cornette, or even just Jim Cornette and Generation Next in general, like it does feel like a bit of a clash. So I completely get what you're saying. But I think one thing that I really enjoyed with this, and I think it's something that Gabe liked doing, is he liked booking like what I call like wrestling Trivial Pursuit moments, in the sense where moments like, oh, it's the first ever meeting between Jim Cornette and Bobby Heenan, or like on the Midnight Express reunion show where Gabe really hyped that, it's the first time all three members of the Midnight Express have been with Cornette on the same side together on a show, like those are the kind of moments I call Trivial Pursuit moments, because they're not like really obvious things, but they're the kind of things you would see as a question on Trivial Pursuit where you go, oh, I didn't really think of that. Oh, that is kind of a neat moment. And I think Gabe really liked when you could have these little like historical moments that aren't necessarily going to sell like thousands of tickets, but they are kind of like, oh, that'll get some mentions for people that are like wrestling nerds. So like, oh, it is cool that Bobby Heenan and Jim Cornette have never been face to face like this before, and Ring of Honor is the company that did it, So I think that still carries some weight too.
Agreed.
So it's intermission. We go backstage where Gary Michael Capetta is joined by the Embassy. Gary says, before the end of the night, we're going to find out who gets the title shot coming out of the Aries Key match. Nana says Lethal's win tonight was a fluke. He says the weapon he has for Jay at Final Battle is bigger than the one he had today. Nana says next time that they're in the ring with John Walters, his lawyers are going to be there to make sure that he and the Outcast Killers can be at ringside. And then meanwhile, in the background, the Killers are all excited because they've won 2 matches in a row. Nana doesn't care. He sends them to prepare his bath at the Hilton before he leaves to have steak with Jimmy Rave. And I just was left thinking, like, if you want a hot bath, you should not be saying them to make your bath now if you're going out for a steak, because that's going to be cold by the time you're done eating that steak.
Yeah, that's true. And I love Nana. Everything Nana says is funny. And like he was like talking, he tells them to go run their bathwater, and then he goes, the finest oils and soaps in Ghana, and it's just like that. He's just so proud of the quality of the soap in Ghana that I just love it so much. And he just loves talking up that soap.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, going back to even him saying shit, like, there's something about, like, anything Nana does for some reason is funny. Like, even just the thought of him, like, in a fancy hotel eating a steak with Jimmy Rave. Like, for some reason, just the idea of Nana and Rave, like, alone at a table eating steak at, like, 8 p.m. on a Saturday, like, is really funny to me. Like, just.
Yeah, oh man, well, these Ring of Honor shows, it's more like 1 a.m., but yes.
Come on, Jim. We got to find a place that's open at 2 in the morning for steak.
Yeah.
Anyway. Sugar Sean Price is backstage with the heel side of Special K, which would be Lacey, Izzy, Deranged, Cloudy, and a brownie eating Cheech. Although when I watched this, a lot of the people there are eating brownies, and earlier Cheech was eating brownies at ringside, so he had some brownies. But anyway, Lacey says now they have all the dead weight losers out of Special K, so now that that's happened, she's going to lead them to glory and titles. Deranged starts to talk, and Lacey just tells him, just shut up and follow me. So they're still kind of painting Lacey. She's not just the leader of this new unit, but she's kind of a very domineering, shrill, like, you guys are stupid, just shut up and I'll make sure you're successful.
You would think that she'd want to manage people that aren't stupid, but yeah. Deranged, after she says follow me, Deranged's like, yeah man, as long as you supply it. It's like, so is she giving them drugs? Because that doesn't, like, is she their drug dealer too? Because that doesn't seem like a recipe for success.
Hey, they were the tag team champions briefly when they were all high on drugs. And as we've known with Dixie and Angel Dust, what Ring of Honor's taught us is athletes are way more successful when they're getting high all the time.
Yeah, and so maybe you could have Dixie and Angel Dust do a promo where they're like, she was the dope dealer and we were the dopes. If you remember that promo that Hawk cut on Draws.
Oh, no, I don't. I just remember the one part of that feud.
Yeah.
The other part of it.
Right.
So coming back after intermission, we have Trent Acid defeating Jerk Jackson via pinfall in 3 minutes, 26 seconds after he hits his implant reverse DDT, or Nolte actually calls it a shovel driver this time. Matt, I'll give it to you. This is, I guess we should just mention, Jerk Jackson is better known as Bobby Fish, and this is not Bobby Fish's first match. I believe in Ring of Honor, I believe Jerk Jackson worked a a pre-show match on one of like the do or die things. But this is his first main. Technically, this is Bobby Fish's first ever main card Ring of Honor show, and he looks dramatically different. Long hair, much beefier. Quite frankly, doesn't look as good physically. Like the short haircut and the mustache was inspired choices. He looks a million times better nowadays.
I'm pretty sure Jerk Jackson was on another main card.
Maybe I'm wrong.
The second anniversary, maybe one of those. I remember us talking about him once before, so that's
yeah.
why.
Maybe I'm wrong. Yeah.
So that, no, but the big story in this match is that the universe exploded because Mark Nolte and CM Punk did commentary together.
Oh.
I have to say, just a small aside for this show. It's weird that they had Punk do commentary for this show, considering that like this was the night of the biggest match of his life, and he's just like, "Yeah, man, these Special K kids are," you know what I mean? Like it's just
and to make clear, like let's just recap the commentary quickly. For this year, for the last however long of Ring of Honor, it's always been either Nolte and Gabe call the whole show, or Punk and Gabe call the whole show. And this is the only time I can remember it's Gabe and Punk for the first half. And then in the second half, it's Gabe and Nolte. And then for this one match in the middle, it's Mark Nolte and CM Punk. And clearly CM Punk hates Mark Nolte. It is the weirdest. Like, why? If you flew Mark Nolte down, why don't you have him call the whole show?
Yeah,
like you just said, it's a huge night for Punk.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I guess I think they probably figured out. Oh, Nolte's not really great with these undercard matches, but. But still, for the purposes of this show, you don't want to make it so like, oh yeah, Punk's spending like half the night just like making jokes about Chad Collier and Alice in Danger's Alley. Like it's just like whatever. So Mark Nolte, so Punk immediately starts riding Nolte about Nolte calling him a jerk, about Nolte mispronouncing Colt Cabana. And then when Punk asks why Nolte pronounces people's names wrong, Nolte goes, "What do you mean, DM?" Which I thought was kind of funny, like the way he said it. He said it in a way that was just like very seamless, which I appreciated.
Yeah.
As far as the match, I mean, who cares, right? But Acid, he's introduced as being from South Philly, Japan, which I have not noticed before, but he probably has been. He's smoking a cigarette and is wetter than I've ever seen him. He does some cool stuff. I do like when Acid does the whole like run into the guardrail thing on the outside. I always think that's pretty good. At one point, Acid at the beginning of the match goes up to a fan in the front row and asks her to kiss his cheek, but then he just plants a big kiss on her lips, and I'm like, man, that better be a plant. Because if not, this is the most problematic thing I've ever seen. But so Jackson takes the moment to jump him. Then Jerk Jackson sets up a chair at ringside and just throws Trent Acid onto it. And it's like, is this just allowed? Like you're using chairs in random matches that have no issues? Like that was weird to me. Like just like, why are they allowed to use chairs? So the whole match is kind of about how Acid has a bad attitude. And all the commentary is also about how buff Jerk Jackson is, which is just funny, knowing Bobby Fish now. But Jackson does a standing drop kick on Acid on the floor, which was really impressive, especially when he was that size. So Jackson gets like 100% of the offense in the first like 4 or 5 minutes until Jerk misses a 450. And then Acid misses a Yakuza kick, but then he hits it after some more reversals, and Acid wins with the Sugar Driver. It was nothing. The match was nothing, except for just the novel combination of announcers, which was the most memorable part for me. Trent Acid is very wet.
So, yeah, when I said earlier during the Flash Flanagan Weapon of Mass Destruction versus Jay Lethal match where that was so different because it felt like Flash was being very unselfish and he was wrestling more for the long time established vet, this was more what I was talking about, which is the usual Ring of Honor tryout match, which is the veteran, in this case Trent, gives the newbie Jerk Jackson basically the entire match, and Jerk Jackson, it's not really a match as much as Jerk Jackson doing like 5 or 6 really cool spots that he can do, like the gorilla press onto the chair, he tries the 450, even though that's Austin Aries' finisher, the stuff you talked about, and then right when it's time to end, Acid just takes back control, hits a couple moves, and it's over. So less a match and more just like a kind of a shitty tryout. But it like the action that was there was perfectly fine. I thought it was funny that like CM Punk was making fun of how that Trent Acid looked like a homeless guy, and I felt like when 2004 CM Punk is saying you look like a hobo, like holy shit, you're in a bad place, because like even CM Punk in a shoot interview would talk about how he looks like a hobo. So when he's calling you that, like holy crap. But like you mentioned, this match is mostly known for just how like Punk clearly, like we've always talked about on these recent shows where it seems like every time Punk was doing a commentary on a show with Gabe, he would give him like one or two jabs at Nolte, and we were like, oh, it seems like he doesn't like Nolte. If you were wondering if that was just shtick, holy shit, like very early on, like Nolte is like, well, you know both these guys pretty well. You know Acid pretty well. Like Nolte says something like that, and Punk immediately, he doesn't. I don't know if he says these exact words, but he's like, he just shuts it down. It's like, no, I don't. Like he doesn't play along with him. He gives him nothing. Like he goes out of his way to make him look like an idiot. And then he brings up, like, again, during the middle of the match, it has nothing to do with the match or what they're talking about. Punk is just like, what's with your pronunciation of these names? And then Punk goes, Colt Cabana, John Walter instead of Walters. And then Nolte actually says this. He goes, the promoter told me it was pronounced that way, and I stopped doing it after my second show. First off, the promoter is Gabe Sapolsky, who does not pronounce it that way. And Gabe Sapolsky is likely, at the time he says that, like 3 feet away from him in some recording room. Like, he completely tries to throw Gabe under the bus. And I just wrote in my notes, like, nobody is looking good here. Like, it was so, you could tell, it was just so uncomfortable. And then to top it all off, Jerk Jackson during this match hawks a gigantic loogie at a fan in the front row, which again, the fan interactions, Matt, they're just, I don't know if this was like be shitty to fans night, but it prevalent up and down the card.
Yes, I did. Now I remember that. Now that you mention it. By the way, I remembered the Jerk Jackson thing. He was on the second anniversary show, but didn't wrestle. Like they were pretending that they were going to have a match with Dunn and Marcos, but then Dunn and Marcos did the whole "we're not going to take it anymore" thing, and the match never happened. So this was his first match on our main card, but not his first appearance.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I'm so glad you figured that out because I was wondering like why didn't it show up in like the cage match results, because I checked just to make sure, but obviously that explains everything. So thank God for you, Matt, for a variety of reasons. But this is one of the more minor ones.
I would agree. Anybody saying thank God you remembered when Jerk Jackson was on an ROH show?
What would I do without that?
Yes, life-saving.
We cut to Allison Danger backstage. She's found the Carnage crew and she wants them to sign her contract for a fight without honor against Moth and Whitmer. They sign eagerly. They're not like scared of this match at all. DeVito chomps on a stogie and says that's their kind of fight. Danger excitedly does a little dance. She's so happy that they've signed, but then DeVito sneaks up behind her while she's dancing and puts an arm around her. Danger's not having any of that.
I thought Danger's whole thing was that she was going to like give them whatever they wanted if they destroyed Moth and Whitmer.
Well, they haven't done it yet, Matt. And so at this point, the Carnage crew pull out some money and ask her for a lap dance. Danger refuses and walks off camera, but then quickly walks back in, snatches away the dollar bill, and angrily says, "Give me that dollar!" And then she leaves again, which I thought was a pretty cute little thing.
Yeah, that was good.
And then
I bet that was ad-libbed.
Yeah, and then DeVito just says, "These rats don't know how to respect us," which is, but just
any use of that word is gross.
So I also meant when you think about like this whole thing, like I love that early on in the show they're like, Allison Danger's like, I got this contract for a fight without honor, Moth and Whitmer against the Carnage crew, and I just need the Carnage crew to sign it. So come on, we're gonna find them. And it's like makes you think it's gonna be some crazy argument to get them to sign or some crazy twist, or it's building to something. And then the segment is literally sign this, and then like, okay. And like that's the segment basically. It's just like, yeah, sure, we want to do this. Like there's like no drama actually to this at all. But
that is funny.
Next up, Colt Cabana and Jimmy Jacobs with Bobby Heenan defeated the Generation Next of Jack Evans, Roderick Strong with Jim Cornette in 17 minutes, 34 seconds when I'm getting infected by it, pinned Evans after a Bobby Heenan tennis racket shot. I thought this was a lot of fun. I always used to read reviews or like hear people say, oh, like this old school match, there was a lot of gaga in this match. And sometimes I would kind of know what they meant, but not sure. Matt, I can confidently say this match had a lot of gaga in it because the first half of this match was more of just a background for Heenan and Cornette to do their thing. Bobby Heenan pulls out a lot of old heel tricks, and Cornette just keeps losing his mind because they're working. This is a match where almost like the review is best served by just describing things that happen. So like in the first half of this match, we get thumbs to the eyes of wrestlers from Bobby Heenan. We get a Cornette group hug with Generation Next. We get multiple babyface chain, not anything, and an extended Cabana hide the chain sequence with he's hiding it along with Bobby. We get a Cabana Jack Evans dance off that leads to a Bobby Heenan moonwalk and crotch chop combo.
And Evans goes to Colt, "You got the height, but can you do this?" And right before he does a backflip. So it's either either you're tall or you could do what Jack Evans does. One of the two.
And yeah, so we get a moment where Heenan lays down the ring for Cornette and suckers it like I'm going to give you a free shot. And Cornette goes for an elbow drop. Heenan rolls out of the way. And so all of this stuff, it's very goofy. It's very old school, but it's really a lot of fun. It's kind of heartwarming in a way because it's just, these two old managers having fun and popping the crowd with old school kind of comedy spots. And of course, Cabana's perfect for a match like that. And then the second half of the match, Cornette's team takes a powder on the outside. We get a count-out tease, which is weird because Ring of Honor, other than pure title matches, isn't supposed to have count-outs. But I guess they just probably maybe Cornette or Heenan didn't even know that, and they just suggested the spot. So from there, we get almost no focus on the managers for a lot of the second half of the match, and we get more of a regular tag match with a heel heat segment with Jacobs being isolated by Strong and Evans. And I would say Evans and Strong are a million times better with a heat sequence than the Havana Pitbulls, not to harp on them. They're not doing anything special. They're just tagging in and out and doing cool offense to Jacobs. It wasn't even their best night. Like Evans almost whiffs on a couple spots where he lands far enough away on a couple like splash type spots where Gabe has to sell them as, that's a glancing blow. He didn't get all of it. And Roderick Strong, meanwhile, busts his mouth open pretty bad. And there's one moment in this match where very clear spot call where you can like see it and hear it, where he's wrestling, he's starting a fight, a strike exchange with Jacobs, and you can clearly see him tell Jacobs, fire back, and Jacobs fires back. But anyway, very entertaining, and it all builds to a hot tag where they do the battering ram, and then the finishing sequence where Cornette comes in, he uses his racket on Cabana, but then Heenan comes in, uses it himself, face team gets the win. For what this was, it's hard to grade this on the scale of like what we grade like typical Ring of Honor action-packed, cutting-edge matches, whatever, but like for what it was attempting to be, I thought was pretty great.
Yeah, I mostly agree. I thought it was a really breath of fresh air on this card with so many long, serious wrestling matches. I will say I thought maybe it didn't have to be this long, just considering how long the show was in general. The two sequences at the beginning, the comedy stuff, which was great, but, lots of stalling. I think, what did you say? It ended up being like 16 or 17 minutes?
I think it was 7. Let me just make sure. It was 17:34. So yeah, pretty long match.
Yeah, I feel like it could have been 10 minutes, and like they would have gotten the point across. But no, everybody, had energy. They were good. It was fun stuff. I like Roderick at this point is growing his hair out. He's starting to look more like the Roderick we all know and love today. But, like Evans and Strong, even when they have a kind of off night, they're such a good tag team. One of the best, probably one of the most, missed opportunity tag teams in history in terms of how amazing they could have been if they were a team for years.
Yeah.
But they went with Strong and Aries as the champions instead later on. But I think Evans and Strong are the team, from that era.
Definitely.
At one point, Jacobs does what Gabe calls a big spear, and Nolte's like, well, a spear anyway. And I was going to get mad at Nolte, but I was like, you know what? Fine. That's a fine. It's a fine joke on Jacobs. He is small compared to other wrestlers. But also when Heenan comes in and hits Cornette with the racket, Gabe yells, "History!" which is It's just really funny. I'm not going to say it was wrong or right to do. It's just really funny. But no, I thought in the overall this was really good and a very appreciated thing on the card. It's one of those things where it's like this really makes the show a big something for everything, something for everyone kind of show. You want a match like this, and this really delivered in terms of that sort of just like the feel good, funny, happy baby face go over kind of situation. And you never see this match in ROH really, and I thought this was it was just a really refreshing thing to have on the card.
Agreed. And like one thing, like I think Ring of Honor, at least up to this point, I think in the future, like usually with these old veterans, I think they do things pretty damn good. They usually do them like the right balance of they don't like overshadow the regulars, but they treat them with lots of respect. And, they usually are like in self-contained little moments like this where like I feel like a lot of promotions, when they have the veterans, they either give them too much deference and make the show too much about them, or they kind of treat them as afterthoughts. And I feel like Ring of Honor of this era does like a real good middle ground that really hits at least a sweet spot for me, I think.
Definitely. They do the best job with legends during this era of pretty much any company that I could think of.
Yeah. I mean, if I was an old legend man, then I wouldn't get the best payoff in Ring of Honor, but definitely in terms of just feeling like I'm going to probably have a good time, and I'm probably going to get a really fun, heartwarming reaction, and I'm probably going to be treated with some level of respect, at least at what I do in front of the crowd. Like, I feel like Ring of Honor would probably be a place high on my list of places to go. But the Observer wrote at the time, apparently both Jim Cornette and Bobby Heenan had a blast working together on the Ring of Honor show. Heenan will be appearing for a few 2005 Ring of Honor dates. They also did a 3-hour sit-down interview session telling stories together that Ring of Honor will release on DVD. From what I was told, after the first question between Cornette and Heenan telling stories, 3 hours were over before a second question could be asked. Both have expressed interest in continuing their feud. So
they don't continue the feud, right? But I'm pretty sure Heenan does. Doesn't he do one more ROH show?
I think he might even do more than one, but he does at least. I think he does maybe more than one. I'm not 100% sure, but because always my memory's so bad I have to do the notes, but I think Heenan, there's a show where CM Punk does a promo with a bunch of profanity and Heenan doesn't come back after that. He doesn't appreciate that. So, yeah, we'll get to that when we get to that, I guess. But no, this is not the last we've seen of Bobby Heenan in Ring of Honor, but we don't see that much more of him.
Right.
So this segment, there's also something really weird where there's a weird moment where Colt beckons Bobby into the ring, and just when he gets in, they cut to a highlight from an old Bryan Danielson Homicide match. And I felt like on a show where they were showing every second of everything, like the fact that they cut away from Bobby Heenan getting in the ring after the match, like I don't know if something went wrong there or something. Like, it just felt weird. Like, why wouldn't you show that when you're showing literally like every other second of everything so far? But
yeah, that is weird. But just, I mean, whatever went wrong, it wasn't newsworthy enough for us to know about it. So
yeah, and that brings us to Bryan Danielson defeating Homicide, who scored to the ring by Julius Smokes, via pinfall in 25 minutes, 29 seconds, with a pinning combination out of a cattle mutilation attempt. He's going for the cattle mutilation, but instead he just kind of rolls Homicide on his shoulders, gets the pin. Matt, two of the best in Ring of Honor, getting a lot of time. So obviously, usually there's high expectations with that. What'd you think for 25 minutes of Danielson Homicide here?
Well, Danielson and Homicide wrestled a lot in ROH, and a lot of their matches were memorable. Obviously, the first one that we already reviewed, the match a couple years later where Homicide wins the title from Danielson, and their Best of 5 series, which is coming up. So this match sort of gets lost in the shuffle. You don't really hear about it too much, even among like ROH diehards. But I really liked it. I thought like, oh god, this is so long, and the show's already so long. I'm not gonna like it, but I thought it was good stuff. So, like this is supposed to be the beginning of the new Danielson now that he's now has hate for the Rottweilers is the first time. And so he does change his look. He has a shaved head. He has black trunks and kick pads. And he even is starting to grow a little beard. A beard, you say. So they kind of have like that as the basis where Danielson is kind of working aggressively, and
And so he tries to do, at one point he tries to do a cravat suplex. Homicide doesn't go over. So Dragon, he lands on his own head, and the announcers act like that was an intentional move, but it didn't look that way to me. But then again, you don't see Bryan Danielson mess up too often, so maybe. I don't know. There's also a sequence where Dragon keeps running the ropes and shoulder blocking Homicide and covering him, which is novel. And eventually he shoulder blocks him to the outside. But eventually what he settles into is working over Homicide's arm. And Homicide, of course, cuts that off with an eye poke. Danielson then body slams Homicide on the ramp, and the announcers mention that Homicide's ankle landed on the ramp. So I guess that's what Dragon will work on now. I don't know how they could tell from that angle that Homicide landed on his ankle, but clearly they're living in the future. That must be what it is. So Homicide takes over after Danielson grabs Smokes. He suplexes Danielson on the timekeeper's table. He's still grabbing at his own leg. He does a running knee in the corner, but he's limping the whole time. So he does a lot of, leg selling, which I thought was pretty good. Homicide actually stretches out Danielson for a while, but Danielson pretty easily escapes and just starts stomping on the ankle some more. So he's being extra aggressive. That's the story. Homicide tries to get out momentum, but every time he does, his ankle injury acts up. So Danielson keeps the advantage. And at one point, he even kicks Julius Smokes on the outside, which is probably something the old Danielson wouldn't have done. Homicide actually blocks the airplane spin with an elbow and goes for his own airplane spin, but his ankle can't hold it up. So now Danielson gets the airplane spin, and Homicide, I like this, Homicide has his middle finger up at the crowd the whole time while he's being spun. And he's spun so for good. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have interrupted you.
No, it's okay. It was a long airplane spin, and Homicide had the middle finger up the whole time. So Danielson went up top for the headbutt, but he's acting very dizzy and he's facing the wrong direction. And he ends up diving on Julius Smokes. And at first you're like, did he dive on him by accident because he's dizzy? But they sold it like it was on purpose. So it's almost like he took the dizziness as a misdirection to dive on Julius Smokes. And that got a big pop. And I thought that was a really good spot. But it allowed Homicide to recover and regain the advantage. And during this whole sequence, Homicide keeps messing with his boot, and they say it's because he's swelling and constricting his ankle. So if he takes the boot off, his ankle will feel better, which, I don't totally know the science behind that, but, maybe, I don't know. So he slowly climbs the ropes. Danielson runs up, catches him for a superplex. He misses the diving headbutt, and Homicide connects with his own diving headbutt. And Nolte says he got up quickly that time, and he chalks it up to an adrenaline rush, which I can accept that, get a burst of adrenaline. Homicide goes for a Yakuza kick, but Danielson moves, gets the cattle mutilation, and Smokes gets on the apron, which gets Danielson to break the hold, which, even Danielson gets distracted by manager on the apron, tisk, tisk, tisk. But Homicide, of course, cheap shots him. He goes for a top rope Rana, but Danielson blocks it and hits a European uppercut off the ropes, gets a 2 count off that. Eventually, the ref stops the match. He stops Danielson from attacking Homicide to allow Homicide to remove the boot. And the announcers really criticize the referee for doing that, which, in the context of wrestling, it is true. It doesn't make sense. Why would you just allow that without allowing the other wrestler to continue to work on him? So Homicide does remove the boot. Smokes tapes up the ankle, and Danielson keeps stomping on the leg, but Homicide pops up and hits him in the head with the boot, like the actual boot that he took off. He hits him in the head with it, and he gets a very convincing near fall. Now, theoretically, if you're allowed to hit someone with a boot that's on your foot, shouldn't you also be allowed to hit somebody with a boot that's on your hand? So really, the boot is not even a weapon, right? It's just part of the match. That's a loophole that I just found. So Dragon escapes the cop killer, grabs him from behind. Homicide hits the low blow. So this is actually playing off their Reborn match, because in that match,
Dragon had him from behind, hit the low blow, hit the lariat, and won. But this time, Homicide hits the low blow, but Danielson blocks the lariat, blocks a second low blow, goes for the cattle mutilation, and then turns it into the pinning combination and gets a sudden 3 count. So there's stuff after the match that I'm sure you'll get to, but I thought this was good. I thought it played off the previous match pretty well. I thought it was a long match, but it was entertaining the whole way through. I'm not totally sure how I feel about the whole boot thing, but I didn't mind it as I was watching it, and I thought it gave the match a story. And I just thought it was really well worked. I like the chemistry between these two, and I'm looking forward to reviewing their best of 5 series. I don't think this was the best match these two had, but it was very good. It was a very good match in my opinion. And considering how late in the card it was and how long the show was, I thought it got pretty good reactions too.
I agree with that too. And I agree about it being very good. I would put that, 3.5, 3 3/4 maybe. But I guess the one thing I would say about that, though, is because I love both these guys so much and because they got a lot of time to work with, very good is kind of disappointing for these two because you kind of hope for great if someone tells you Bryan Danielson and Homicide get 25 minutes. But as you were noting to me a little while ago, like in a chat, you were kind of mentioning, I don't remember all of those best of 5 matches. Like I remember them being kind of a mixed bag. Some were good, some were bad. So we'll get to revisit and see. Like it feels like they do have chemistry, but maybe that chemistry it doesn't always click 100%. We'll find out when we rewatch this. But I thought this was very good. Danielson, I thought every move in the moment was really good. Like these guys are just both excellent in the moment. I feel like Danielson is one of my favorite, if not my favorite wrestler of all time. But something I've noticed on a couple 2004 rewatching these matches is if there is a flaw of Danielson, sometimes I feel like he kind of comes into the match and he makes it up as he goes along, which in a sense is great because that's how a lot of the great wrestlers throughout history have done it, is they go in with very little preconceived ideas or spots, and then they kind of just go where the match takes them. But I feel like sometimes with Danielson matches, occasionally they don't become any more than the sum of their parts. Like to me, this match felt like just its parts. Like move to move was good, but I didn't feel like it really became something special. Where in my favorite Danielson matches, it kind of builds and builds, and at the end you're like, it's become something. These things have kind of come together. I also felt like Homicide did an excellent job selling his leg. Homicide does so many little things on the selling of his ankle. He'll do moves differently than he normally does. Like you mentioned, the running boot to the corner. It's basically is almost like a running ass to the corner because he doesn't lead with his feet to the face. He almost puts his feet above. He does moves differently. He'll limp when he runs the ropes. There's a point where he's in a cover, and even before he kicks out, he's holding his ankle in pain while he's being covered, even while the cover's going on. He does so many good little things, and then of course grabbing the boot at the end and all that stuff.
Homicide was the better performer in this match, and how often can you say that about a Danielson match?
Yeah, I agree. And one problem about the ankle I felt though was Homicide's the heel in this feud. And it made him sympathetic because he was the guy fighting through an injury the whole way. And yes, he does cheat at the end with the boot. Although, like you said, if boot on the hand is, I was going to say it's worth 2 in the bush. We need a rhyming thing that lets you know that it's okay to use a boot on the hand. A boot on the hand, it's all good, man.
I think that's perfect.
But
Breaking Bad.
Yeah, that's where it really came from.
Better Call Saul. I guess I should have said that instead.
Best out of 3 falls. Better Call Saul. No,
it's all good, man.
yeah, I know. But I just felt like it was kind of put Homicide in a position where I was feeling sympathy for him in a match where I know the point is not that I should be feeling sympathy for Homicide. And also, for a guy that is such a ring general like Danielson, I felt like Homicide was selling the ankle so good, and Danielson didn't work that much on it. A few times in the match he'd stomp on it a bit, but he didn't really work on it with submissions or really key in on it. And it's weird because again, you expect Danielson is such a cerebral wrestler that you would think, he's just gonna focus in on that and that's gonna be the story of the match. And it really isn't. The story, Homicide's selling his ass off with the ankle, but the story isn't really Danielson working on the ankle. It's more Homicide's ankle's hurt, and he eventually gets his boot off and hits Danielson with it. Like it's more Homicide telling the story, and Danielson's not really doing much to tell it. But again, the moments in the match are good. Like every move that you describe, like there's lots of really good, just solid work. I love that fake out, like you mentioned, where he's dizzy and doing the top rope headbutt, and you think, oh, he's just pointing the wrong way because he's dizzy, but then actually he jumps on Smokes all the way on the floor. There is a moment, I should have gotten a timestamp for this, although who knows how everyone's watching this, but there's a moment, if you pay attention, Julius Smokes is standing right by the ring during a moment. You can just see him in the background. The camera's not focused on him. He's in the background. But his gum, he's chewing gum, it falls out of his mouth and it falls like on his clothes. And he has a classic, I've been here, like freak out where he's like, oh shit, I lost my gum. And he's trying to like figure out where it is on his shirt and pick it up. And for some reason, it just made me lose it watching it. And apart from that, just looking at my notes. Oh, one question I was going to ask you, Matt, is another little minor gripe I had with this match is for a match that was billed as like, this is the new kind of Bryan Danielson. This is, more intense. He's angry this time. Do you feel like he worked that much more intense than he normally does? Like he definitely changed his look, like you mentioned, but I feel like normally Danielson often works fairly like growly and intense in this period. I didn't feel like he was that much more intense.
I do think he was more intense. I don't agree that he was working growly during this period. I think in recent shows he was actually being kind of like cocky and smirky, and you don't get any of that here. Like if you remember the Liger match, like he was like totally doing that. Even the Joe match where he was like doing like the runner, like, the rope-a-dope and then like kind of like doing a little dancing and stuff like that. I feel like he was leaning more into that version of Bryan Danielson. And now he's a little bit more into like the snarly version, the stomping on the leg, the hitting Smokes. Like there is still a little bit of goofiness in like the airplane spin thing. Yeah. Like, so he hasn't lost it completely. But I do think it's a mild evolution, but I do think it's an evolution. I do think like this is not a version of Danielson that we've seen at least in a while. And I think the look makes a difference. Like, I mean, as he grows out the beard, like he clearly like takes on a different persona as like a quirky weirdo, and eventually I think right before he leaves, for Europe, he even switches his music to like the Imperial March from Star Wars, which is very funny. We're a few months away from that, but he's already coming out with the cape. And like, just like, I think you're right. The style is not 100% different, but the vibe is different. And I think that's enough.
There are some differences I like. Like there is one moment early on where he like gets pissed at Homicide and he throws like really good closed fist punches from Bryan Danielson, and like I don't know how many times I've ever seen Bryan Danielson throw punches, and they look pretty good. And that's like always fascinating when you see a wrestler that doesn't usually throw punches, because 9 times out of 10 they don't look good. I thought these looked pretty good. And he only throws like a few, and then he doesn't do any more. And I kind of reminded that I think Danielson once was when he came back from his last really bad injury, he was like, oh, maybe I've been studying like Jerry Lawler and stuff. And he was like, because I want to wrestle till I'm in my 60s or 70s like them. And I was just thinking like maybe deep down there's like a Bryan Danielson we'll be watching when he's like 48 years old where he's just like throwing a lot of punches. Like I think he has it in him.
There's a lot of wrestlers that did that. And I mean, Danielson's a guy, it seems like, can do pretty much anything he wants to do. So if that's what his body is telling him, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
Definitely. And one thing I want to single out, too, is the finish, because I really like the finish, actually. I've nitpicked this match, but I really like the finish. It's a finish where I think it won't seem that dramatic unless you know that's playing off their last Ring of Honor match, which to their credit, commentary tells you what it's playing off of. Because Homicide mule kicks Danielson in the nuts, and then he goes for the lariat, which is exactly how he won their first match in Ring of Honor. But then Danielson dodges the lariat, and then he goes for the cat of mutilation, and Homicide tries for a second mule kick to the balls, and then Danielson blocks the kick with his foot. And I just thought that was like really cool playing off of the past. And Matt, last thing I want to mention, well, two things. First off, Mark Nolte early on says, I think if a wrestling match will favor Homicide over Danielson. What? Like,
Yeah,
Homicide can do everything.
Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Homicide can do everything, but I don't think he has the edge in a wrestling match.
No, I mean, obviously that's ridiculous, but he's said similar things like that before. But I did like one thing that Nolte said about, like, how Homicide is, like, the best at executing a plan. And, like, that's not the sort of way that they promote Homicide usually, but it actually makes sense if you, like, go through Homicide's matches where he's really good at, like, you know, devising, like, even though he's kind of a wild man, like, devising a strategy, being clever in a match. Like, I think it's cool that Nolte is like, sells Homicide like that, because it's true, like, in terms of, like, the way he performs. But you're right. He is not a considered a better pure wrestler than Bryan Danielson. No, he is not. They did not name the technical wrestling award in the Observer the Homicide Award.
If there was an award for like most well-rounded wrestler, I would definitely consider naming it after Homicide. But yeah, but I think Homicide. It's interesting when I think about his year, and obviously we'll wrap it up more in the next episode with our year-end stuff. But like. Homicide is, I feel like last year we gave him our Wrestler of the Year award. I feel like last year he had a couple of the really high top end matches, like, you know, the do or die match with Joe, and then the matches with Carino were like some of our favorite matches of the year. In fact, the Carino match, the first one, was our match of the year. But like, I feel like this year he's had a lot of matches like this where it's like it's not going to be remembered as a classic match or even maybe like even a 4-star match, but he's been like in a lot of really good matches where he has like really great individual performances where it's kind of sad because it's kind of a year where he's good, but maybe you're not going to – just looking at the matches on paper, you're not realizing like how good Homicide is in these matches because he's really good in them.
And I think that's sort of the story for Homicide's career, like in ROH for the rest of time. Like, I don't think he ever has a year with the level of matches that he had in 2003, but he's just really good, you know, all the time.
And then finally, the thing I wanted to mention on commentary, because I thought this was just an amazing little bit of commentary that would not ever happen nowadays. It just shows you how much times change. Gabe says Homicide, you know, because remember, folks, this is right after a month after Homicide had a match with John Walters where he got like legit concussed really bad. And thank God between the time we did that last episode and this one, no concussions have happened in pro wrestling like in modern times. So
yeah, where the match kept going? No, that doesn't happen now.
No. Tony Khan clearly does not listen to Through the Years, and shame on him. But so Gabe says Homicide's coming off a concussion, so he may be, quote, soft in the head. And then Gabe goes on to say there's only so many concussions you can take, and with each concussion, you become more susceptible to another concussion, which is all true, but that's fucking amazing because no announcer would dwell on that in 2020. Like, holy shit. Like, well, it's just amazing.
It also shows that Gabe knew back when he let Homicide continue that match what the consequences were.
Yeah, it's just amazing because, like, I always say when people are like, "Oh, we didn't know concussions were bad until 5 or 10 years ago," because no, people decades ago knew concussions were bad, but they're definitely like until I would say the Benoit murders, they were not treated. They were treated as more like an angle prop sometimes, like this, where it was like it's a way to sell this match. Like, oh, Homicide had a bad concussion recently, and he could have another one. Like, people didn't really realize how serious that could be, you know, which we really should have because we're in the era of like Bret Hart fucking having his career ended from concussions.
As a non-athlete, when I would hear like wrestling announcers talk about concussions, like they would usually brush them off so nonchalantly that I really just kind of thought like, oh, they suck, but they're not. You know, it didn't strike me as like these life-altering events, and clearly we know that they very much can be.
There was like one angle WWF did in the 90s where Owen Hart like did an enziguri to Shawn Michaels and gave him a concussion. They really played that up like as a storyline. But yeah, for the most part, concussions were always like, oh, that's an injury you can work through, you know.
Right, the guy got dinged, he got a concussion, but he'll be back, you know, like, oh, it was like, I remember when Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 19 landed on his head in the Shooting Star press, and everyone was like, oh man, like he he might have broken his neck. He was bleeding from the nose. What is his internal bleeding? And then you find out oh, it was a concussion. I remember the reaction for a lot of people, including me, was oh, just a concussion. He'll be fine. But it's oh, that's probably a pretty bad concussion when Brock Lesnar, someone the size of Brock Lesnar, lands on Brock Lesnar's head,
Even in the history of ThROH The Years, I remember reading that thing from The Observer in one of the shows last year, that the main event of that show where Low-Key legit knocked out Dan Moff. And I remember reading the report in The Observer for that episode where Dave was the good news is Moff went to the hospital and he doesn't have a concussion. And it's he got knocked unconscious. I love that we lived in this era where it's and I guess we still live in that, because that's the same thing with the Matt Hardy thing. Yeah, he was stumbling to his feet and, all this stuff, but he doesn't have a concussion. At some point, the word concussion, I almost don't care about that as much as just head trauma and being screwed up. But, it's just weird. But right. After the match, Homicide attacks Danielson. He tries to fight back, but Julius Smokes joins in, as do the Havana Pitbulls and Low Key, who all run from the back. So Ring of Honor students try and save Danielson, but to no positive effect. They get beaten down. Homicide does
very brave of those students to come out of why? Why did they decide that they were going to be the ones to save Bryan Danielson?
Yeah, I mean, Danielson isn't even the trainer yet. It's not on them. He's not their master yet. But
Punk trained them to be honorable men.
Homicide does a top rope double stomp to Danielson's arm as it's being held out to his side. Dunn and Marcos then try and help Danielson. So I think what we're learning about the show is only the low card guys care about Bryan Danielson. Right. They get beaten down. Homicide goes after Danielson's eye. Smokes hits him with his shoe and drops an elbow on Danielson. Smokes does. And then finally, John Walters, Jay Lethal, Nigel McGuinness, and the Carnage Crew and Chad Collier chase away the Rottweilers.
Although I do love when they come out and the commentators are finally someone came out to save Bryan Danielson. It's oh, these poor guys, these Dunn and Marcos and. Yeah. The students.
Yeah. Marco should just be in the corner with one single tear dripping down his face. But so yeah, I thought that was a pretty good beatdown. Obviously, this feud's just getting started.
Good angle. Good angle. And it's funny because he was so mad about the beatdown at the last show. This one was 85,000 times more intense than that one.
Yeah. Before the next match, we get, which is the main event, we get Gabe and Punk talking over video highlights of the previous two Joe Punk matches. I felt like this had a cool old school feel to it because Punk was really, in character talking strategy, this is why I did this, and ooh, look at this one and all this stuff. And there's also a funny little moment where he goes, I have knees like KJ Muto's, which was a funny thing. But the only one negative to me was I felt like some people I've heard complain it's a little too long, and it was fairly long for one of these segments on an already long show. But also, I know they just did this because Punk's basically a Ring of Honor employee at this point between the school and the commentary. He was likely around. But, it is a little weird that, Punk gets this basically, a sit-down interview to go over his matches, and Joe, the world champion, doesn't. But I realize that's just logistics. But what did you think of this? Because I know seeing opinions online, some people liked this and some people didn't.
I mostly liked it. It did feel like after watching this whole show, I'm do I really want to watch this now too? Especially having seen their shoot interviews where they explain more of it. But it's a DVD, so no one's forced to watch everything all at once anyway. Yeah. So it's fine. I thought it was good. I thought it added a different vibe to the match. It made the match seem more important. I do wish that we got a more traditional CM Punk promo on this show where he's more intense about the match, because he's so casual in every moment that we see or hear from him on the DVD. And I do think that kind of undermines the vibe. Not too much, because the match itself makes up for it, but I don't know. That's really my only complaint about it.
Yeah, going to what you said earlier, which is a guy having on the eve of the biggest match of his life probably shouldn't be cracking jokes about Alice in Danger an hour or a couple hours before. Right. That just doesn't look great.
Totally.
But that brings us to the main event, the Ring of Honor World Title match. Samoa Joe defeats CM Punk in 31 minutes, 33 seconds when he makes him pass out in the rear naked choke. So before the match, Ricky Steamboat gets a full entrance. He slaps hands with everyone in the front row. He gets in the ring, gets on the mic, and he says, tonight has been one hell of a show. He says, you could tell everyone's been working their butt off, and he gives the crowd, he prompts the crowd to give the wrestlers a hand. Steamboat brings up the earlier Cornette promo and says his message for Cornette is that legends don't die. And then Ricky says he came out to say something else, but he had to say that first. Steamboat then brings up Mick Foley's past comments that Steamboat doesn't have any guts. Steamboat says he won't say the same thing about Foley, but he slams him for doing a personal appearance at a hockey game instead of being at the show tonight, which was a real thing. Foley wasn't booked for this night because he had a personal appearance at a hockey game. And he says Foley has some of the biggest balls and has taken some of the biggest bumps, but he doesn't have any wrestling skill. Ricky says maybe the next time they're in this building, they'll have a face-to-face confrontation, his skill against Foley's guts. Steamboat then puts over the upcoming main event and says tonight he's just going to plant his butt at the timekeeper's table and he's just going to be a fan and enjoy the match. I don't know why Steamboat needed a full promo here and why he felt the need to bring up the Cornette thing, but it wasn't bad, and it sets up his involvement in a minute. So, okay, this match, oh boy, Matt. I remember when this match happened 16 years ago. I was just a dumb little 20-year-old Canadian kid. I was feverishly refreshing the Ring of Honor message board, waiting for someone to post the result. I think this was the first time I ever followed a Ring of Honor results page live, was for this match. Because, even as someone who wasn't watching from show to show, I had seen the first Joe versus Punk draw. I knew about the second one and its legend, and I was like, man, this is going to be something. Yeah, I was the same way. I was hoping and convinced that Punk would win, and I was convinced that the match would probably be over 60 minutes because it made sense to me. Because when you watch wrestling long enough, you get kind of a feel for the rhythms of wrestling booking, and I just thought to myself, well, Joe had basically been champ for well over a year. He had beaten every top name except Low Ki, and Low Ki was a heel. He beat Danielson. He beat Homicide a million times. He beat Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles even. He beat Punk early on in his title reign in a non-title match. So I thought the only guy left that could beat him, unless you're going to do Ki re-winning the title as a heel, would be Punk. And I thought also the natural rhythm of wrestling booking would be like the challenger gets close but doesn't get it, and then he finally gets it. So I thought, well, Punk had the two draws. It'd be really anticlimactic for him to lose. So I was convinced, Punk's winning this. It's going to be at least 65 minutes.
Right. I mean, that's what they wanted you to think, right? They built up the no time limit thing, clearly, this is exactly what they wanted.
When I was listening to an honorable mention about this show, they were saying that people on the message board were speculating that this would be a 2-hour match or a 30-second flash pin or all this stuff. Maybe some people online were, but for me, I was completely hook, line, and sinker thinking Punk wins 65 minutes or more. That's that. And so they completely had me. And so I keep refreshing, and then I see Samoa Joe wins, and he wins in half an hour. And I'll be honest, Matt, my initial reaction was massive disappointment. I was a big Joe fan, but I was just I thought all the booking was pointing this way. It's what I kind of convinced myself should happen. It's what I convinced myself would happen. And I was so disappointed. And that's why this match is fucking genius, Matt. Because this match, and really the first 10 minutes, the last two matches, which were each an hour, and the first 10 minutes of this match are all built to raising your expectations that CM Punk and Samoa Joe matches go a certain way. And so it's an hour. It's 130 minutes of wrestling that builds to a final 21 minutes, which is the last 21 minutes of this 31-minute match, completely flips. It's built to just flipping everything. And Punk even said it in the shoot, which I got notes on. We can talk after we review the match, where he says the whole point of this was, everything we did in this trilogy built up to the end. And so just to kind of go over the story of this match, we recap the stories of the first two, but just as a refresher, the whole point is Samoa Joe's the unbeatable champion. He's held the title for over a year. And in fact, not only has he held the title for over a year, I think very rarely has he even had a match go over 20 minutes, a singles match, a title defense, that is. And so Punk's well, how can I beat this guy? And we find out in their first match of 2004 he's going to do a headlocks. Just put him in headlocks every chance he can, at least for the first half an hour or so. And he's going to wear Joe down and get him into deep waters, get him to do a match longer than he's ever done before and see what happens. And if you know Punk's history, it makes even more sense because before Punk came to Ring of Honor, he kind of rose to prominence first as the guy who did really long matches with Chris Hero in IWA Mid-South. So you kind of know, this makes complete sense for Punk. So first match, 60-minute draw. Punk doesn't win, but he becomes the only guy Joe can't beat. They do a rematch, 60-minute draw, same thing. Joe's really getting frustrated in that match, although he starts doing better by the end. And so this match starts off. Punk goes for headlocks. Joe avoids the first lockup. He avoids or gets out quickly, first headlock or two. But then Punk starts getting the headlocks again. And the first 10 minutes, it's not completely the same, but it's pretty similar to the first two matches. And then Joe just, during one sequence, gets a huge, loud kick, like a soccer kick to Punk's head when he's bent over. Punk bails to the outside. He blades, and that changes everything. This was an intentional blade. I mean, I said blade, so it's obviously intentional blood. But, the whole point of this is to be blood as a story. It's not blood just because it's a big match. Because from there, Punk doesn't try and do the headlocks anymore. The whole idea is Punk in this the whole story of this match and this trilogy is Punk found this one thing, headlocks, which gives him a chance against Joe. And then all of a sudden in this no time limit final match, he starts bleeding 10 minutes in and he can't do headlocks because he can't draw this match out. He has to try and end it now. And then we find out what happens, which is when Punk can't use his strategy anymore, which is he pushes Joe pretty hard in some cases, but Joe fucking kicks his ass. The Punk in large sequences in this match is really beaten up in a way he isn't in the first two matches. And that's a lot of why this match is incredible. But also they do all sorts of little switches on the past stuff. Like, for example, Punk in the first two matches, 2 hours of wrestling, he never wins the strike exchange. He'll throw some strikes, but Joe always wins the strike exchange in the end. There's a strike exchange in this match where Punk actually wins. And Joe crumples to the mat all dizzy.
Down goes Samoa Joe.
Yeah, exactly. And there's, they do stuff they switch up spots where what worked in the past doesn't, or what didn't before. Their example, the first two Punk Joe matches of the year, Punk goes for a Rana off the apron to the floor. Joe catches him, swings him into the barricade, or all sorts of stuff. This time, you think Punk's going to go for it again. Instead, he just hits a drop kick off the apron to the floor, and it hits because it's a switch-up. Joe's not expecting it. There's stuff like Joe avoids the Shining Wizard, but eventually Punk hits it. Joe does a Rana to Punk. There are all sorts of little switch-ups. And then this is also, I would say, easily the most physical match these two have had. Punk's doing a lot of drop kicks to the back of Joe's head and really working over the neck. And I felt like both guys really laying it in a bit more than they would in their other two matches. And it all builds and builds, and it's just so good because it's just playing on all your expectations. It's a completely different match. Punk's great at selling, getting the shit beat out of him, being the real underdog for the first time in the trilogy. Joe's great at just being, I would say Joe, if the second match was Joe being really frustrated, this match is Joe who's he's done playing around. He is just taking it so serious. He's giving Punk a lot of respect, but it's he's not frustrated, but he's just staring just very intense of Joe in tens of different spots. It's hard to describe, but and then comes one of my favorite spots ever in wrestling. And we can get to the story behind this spot, but late in the match, and this spot kind of sums up how I feel about the whole match. Late in the match, Joe puts his feet on the ropes during a pin of Punk, and it's a 2 count, and Punk still kicks out anyway. And the crowd, Jersey was a city that didn't like Punk. So even in this match where he's long into his babyface run, it was still 50-50 Joe Punk. After that spot, the crowd actually boos and chants "fuck you, Joe." And when I heard about that spot and when I watched that spot, my first reaction was just like when I heard about this match being 30 minutes, Joe winning, was that doesn't make sense. Joe's not a heel. And then you think about it and you realize it's fucking genius because it puts over how much Joe cares about winning keeping the title, and how scared he is that Punk could beat him. Because Joe doesn't turn heel off of this move. It's not like from this point on he's a heel. He's just this one moment where he is so scared that he's going to lose the title. He has become so desperate after these 3 matches. He's going to cheat, and he's never cheated in his entire title reign, and he cheats here, and it doesn't work, and he doesn't cheat again in the rest of the match. But it's just a genius spot that shows how fucking desperate he is, and I love it. It's like it's a moment that pays off. And Matt, I know I'm talking a lot, so I'll just wrap up quick, but. One other thing I think why I love this match so much is it pays off so many spots. It pays off spots, Matt, that aren't even spots that are related to this feud, because there is a moment, and it's a spot, there's part of it we can talk after you're done reviewing why I don't like this spot all the way, but there's a spot late in the match where Joe gets Punk in the choke, and Punk, his arms go up. A ref raises the arm, drops it, goes down 3 times. As the ref goes to call the match, Steamboat notices Punk's hand has started to twitch, and he stops the timekeeper from ringing the bell. And what I love about that is maybe it's not intentional, but that felt like a payoff to the entire Steamboat Punk feud, because the whole point of that feud started with Punk feeling like Steamboat, I think Steamboat was a ref for one of his pure title matches with AJ, like screwed him out of that match. And I just love, even though they've made up and been working together for a while now, that felt like the ultimate payoff where it's like come completely full circle, where now Steamboat has gone from being a guy Punk felt like fucked him over, even though Steamboat didn't, to now Steamboat has literally like saved him in his most important match. And then at the end, the finish of this match, another part, this is the other thing they pay off that isn't even like a part of the feud, is if you've been a long-time Ring of Honor watcher, and they even talk about it on commentary, Joe's one weakness, the times he's lost matches that weren't title matches, has often been through roll-ups. Like quick roll-ups, Joe sometimes can't kick out of them. Like Moth in a 6-man tag to set up their singles match in 2003, he pinned him with a quick pinning roll-up, and then Colt Cabana famously at Survival of the Fittest eliminated Joe. He was the first elimination with a roll-up. And so Punk late in the match, he's so desperate, he's tried everything. He tries a roll-up. Joe kicks out at 2 and pops him right into the choke, and then Punk is fucking dead. He keeps applying the choke. He suplexes Punk a couple times and just makes him pass out. And that's, again, it pays off so much. This is a match more than very few matches I've seen, other than maybe like All Japan in the 90s, that rewards you for watching Ring of Honor it rewards you for doing a Ring of Honor podcast, Matt. It plays off so many little things, and it's so much better if you've watched it. Like, I'm going to say this right now. I think this is a 5-star match. I think this is the best match of the trilogy, and I think this is the best match we've watched so far on Through the Years. And I think if you just watch this match without any of the context of the history of these guys, of their matches, of just their characters, I think it's like a 4.25-star match, which is coincidentally what Dave Meltzer gives this match. I think if you know all the history, it is a no second thought 5-star match. I think this match is fantastic. Matt, I'll shut up now. What do you think of this match?
Well, after my review of the last 60-minute match, Joe vs. Punk 2, you said that was the best recap I ever gave on the show. I would say this is definitely the best recap you ever gave on the show. Fantastic job. And obviously I feel like when you feel passionately about whatever you're reviewing and have put a lot of thought into it, that obviously makes the review better. So, and you could tell how much you love the match. But let me ask you this. Did you know you felt this way about this match before you watched it? Like, did you already know going into this, like, oh, I'm pretty sure that third match is the one that I liked the best?
I did not remember which one I preferred more, or between 2. I knew it was between 2 and 3, which is what most people will say. But here's the thing I thought I was going to say, the third match is maybe more fun, but it's not as good as the second match because the third match is just paying off a bunch of stuff the second one paid off, and it's not fair to give it all that credit. But here's the thing. When I watched this match, I realized by the end I was having such a good time that, like, I didn't care. Like, I don't care if technically this match is good because it's kind of paying off a lot of stuff. It pays off a lot of stuff. And so to me, I don't care why this match, was better. To me, it just was the most fun I've had watching a match in a long time. Rewatching it, so no, I didn't remember loving it this much. I think I love it this much now because honestly, like doing the podcast, without doing the podcast, I wouldn't have noticed stuff like I don't think the first time I watched it, I noticed like the significance of Punk doing the roll up into the choke that ends the match. Like, that's only from the fact that we've talked about the roll ups and stuff before now. You know, like now I've focused on this so much more that I noticed even little things like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. So I guess, you know, for me, for what I'll say about the match is, I'll get to like my final thoughts at the end. I'll save them. But, so there are a couple of things that I disagree with you on minorly. They're very minor, which is I do think that the way this match started, the first 10 minutes, I don't think it was quite the same as the first two matches. Like, I don't think that they started this match with the idea that this was going to like look like the same 60-minute slow pace. I think they started out at a much faster pace. Even the headlock stuff. Like, the early stuff was Joe kind of not allowing Punk to get the headlocks. Like, it was like Joe scouted it. And, like, so Punk's strategy wasn't working for the first time. And they were going real fast. Then eventually, Punk got the headlock after a backslide. And he goes, "I got you now, motherfucker." And it was like, so there was this vibe, like, the match is faster paced, but not so fast paced that they couldn't possibly do the hour. But it got you wondering. And then once Punk got busted open, it was like, okay, this is a clear message to the crowd. You are not getting a 60-minute match here. Don't expect it. The guy's bleeding, you know?
Yeah.
And I thought that's good because it kind of changes up the expectations. It gets the crowd to care about the near falls. Which,
actually, I just want to ask you a quick question before we move off this, because I'm really curious about this. So reading reports, and we'll get to it after, like, I think it's in the Observer, like, live reports that, some fans were a little disappointed because they thought the match was going 60 or whatever. And Matt, do you think if you're watching this match live in that building after 10 minutes, do you really think at that point this match is going 60?
No.
Not just the blood, but even the pace they're cutting.
Yeah, no way. I mean, to me, that was like one of the main purposes of the blood. It was like to be like, hey guys, this ain't gonna be a 60-minute match. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. And it immediately makes the match different. And I thought that was really good. And Joe, you know, even goes different because he starts tearing at Punk's cut. You know, it's like, it's a totally different vibe. And, you know, and I loved it. Like, it's great. Like, I have nothing negative to say about that. But another thing that I really like about this match is this is almost like one of those Misawa versus Kobashi matches where they just do like fourth gear near falls for like 25 minutes. But sometimes those matches can like feel like just an endless parade of false finishes and near falls, and it's like almost like too much. And nowadays, when you have a match that's just tons of near falls, it's like the guys hitting their finishers over and over and over again, or each other's finishers, or someone else's finishers, or dropping each other on their head. This match had 20 minutes of like big time false finishes almost. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I'd say like 12 minutes of big time false finishes. But none of them were hackneyed. They did not spam finishers. They did not repeat things. Like, it's almost like a lost art to do false finishes that aren't based on a wrestler's finishing move. And
Matt, there's no Pepsi plunge in this. There's no muscle buster. Yeah. There's no there's no island driver. There's none of that.
Right. And as we talked about, they were considering how much they did. Now we're talking about 2 hours and 31 minutes. They were so conservative in terms of like how much they did, you know what I mean? Like they held back, and they still did everything at the same time. You know, this was the choke that won Joe the match. Pretty sure that was the first choke of the entire series, right?
Yeah, like there's the two chokes in this match, and the first one Punk does the Piper Brett flip over spot. Yeah, and I think both of those, like, I think he's tried the choke before, but I don't think he ever got it on. Like, yeah, so like, it really is a lost art to like the way they did that, and it's very impressive that they were able to pull it off with their levels of experience. I thought that before the legs on the ropes thing, my favorite spot of the match was where so they do the whole big fight on the top rope, just like at the end of the 60-minute match. You know, that's probably the best part of that 60-minute match was the fight on the top rope. So, Joe goes for a superplex, and Punk fights him off, and he bites Joe's face. And Punk like drops down and tries to powerbomb Joe off the top, and that's when Joe hits the Rana.
and then hits an insane lariat. And Punk's kick out of that is one of the biggest pops of the whole match. I thought that was the spot of the match. Just like people, like no one can believe that Punk kicked out of that. And at that point, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, going to your thing, like what I asked you earlier about how could people say the fans thought the match was going to go long? The fans bought that Joe was going to win with a lariat.
Right. No, right. They bought all of these false finishes that the guys never win with. But part of that is Joe wins with lots of different moves.
Yeah.
Like
he's won with a lariat.
Yeah, he's won. Yeah. So that's a big part of it. So like as soon as that spot happens, Gabe is like, "This is Punk's night. I can feel it." And like I'm like, "Oh man, he's telegraphing." But then immediately, after that, when Joe kicks out, Gabe's like, "No, I was wrong. Joe's gonna be champion forever." And I love that. What one great thing about the Joe putting his foot on the ropes is like the moment that it happened, it was basically like they were doing a forearm exchange and Punk was just getting the best of it and like screaming and just like really like just like he had Joe on the ropes. And that's when Joe picked the moment to grab Punk's legs, put his legs on the ropes, and just like, the fuck you Joe chant. It just worked like a charm. And, it's just such a brilliant spot. And then Punk does go for a Pepsi plunge, and that's when Joe knocks off and goes for a splash, but he overshoots and knees Punk in the face. That's really, I think, the only kind of like botchy thing in the match, but it worked just fine because both guys were down, and that's when, Punk did the roll up, like you said. Joe grabbed the choke, the please don't tap chant, but Punk does pass out. Gabe's like, Punk may have died there. He had to do it. So, what I loved is that, like, it played on expectations by starting faster, but not so fast that they couldn't have gone long until the blade job. But once they kicked into high gear, they stayed in high gear, for a long time. The one thing for me, I think, that puts it slightly, and I would say this is a 5-star match also. I would think that's pretty fair. Just one of the best matches in ROH history to this day. The one thing that I would make that for me puts the Joe vs. Punk 2 ahead of it is that match just felt so historic. And I do slightly like the playing on past spots, playing on thing, slightly less than you do. I appreciate it, but I do think it can go overboard. And I think this very, very barely bordered on overboard, just in terms of like, just too clever by half. And I would say not even by half at this point, like too clever maybe by like a 12th. Just in terms of like so much. It's like, oh yeah, we did this in the last match. We'll do this. We'll do this in the last match. We'll do this. And it's just like, maybe there's a little bit less is more when it comes from that. I see what you're saying and I get why that appeals to you so much. It appeals to me just slightly less, but I don't want to take anything away from the match. I thought the match was amazing. It is super fascinating to me that when I went back and looked at like live reports, you didn't have people really praising it to that level. People loved the match, some of them were like, it's disappointing, but you didn't have anyone saying this is like an all-time match of the year. And you didn't really hear people saying that until the match came out on video. And I wonder if this is a match that just played so much better on video because you could see all the little nuances much better than you could in the moment and in the crowd. And like, that's just something I wonder. Cause I don't know if you found live reports that really said this was an all-timer. I didn't. And I think most ROH fans at this point would say this is an all-timer.
A couple things there. Okay, so first off, I believe this match didn't start till a few minutes after midnight. And I think the atmosphere, considering that, is great. I think this has a really great fight atmosphere. I think the crowd's pretty loud not the loudest I've heard in Ring of Honor, but pretty loud. But part of me wonders if that might play a little bit. And I think the other part is maybe what I just started off with, which is I bet you a bunch of fans thought Punk was going to win. And maybe that kind of deflated them in a weird way. Like there are some fans.
But and I think also people like love the idea of long, and like it's crazy because a 31-minute match is a really freaking long match. Like that's a long match. It's just half as long as their last two matches.
That's probably like the 5th longest Joe title defense in Ring of Honor because he's got the 2 60-minute draws with Punk, he's got the 40-something minute match with Danielson.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. It's like
the 4th longest.
Yes,
then. Yeah. So yeah, it's just because you're comparing it, and And so I thought it was interesting what you said about comparing this to the second match. So this is my I was thinking about this. I think all three of these matches, even the first draw, which is not as good as these two, but still great, I would say they all are great matches that are better if you know the background and have watched the matches before them. Like even the first match, it's not as good if you don't know like why it's significant that Punk is taking Joe this long, and that Joe's never been in matches this long, and he's usually not on the defensive like this. But what I will say is, I think all these matches are still great, but not as great if you watch them without context. But if you watch them without context, I think the second match is the best. I think without, and again, like you were saying, I like all the callbacks. You think sometimes they're a little too, you like them, but sometimes it's all a little almost too cute. I think if you strip that away and just go, I want to watch these matches each separately just as a match, I think the second is the best match. But because I love that stuff so much, and because I feel like it pays off so much stuff, that's what puts this on. And I also think one other reason, Matt, maybe why this match isn't remembered as fondly, it doesn't quite get with you to what you were saying, because I know you were talking about like live reports, what fans thought right at the time. But like, I do think part of it is, first off, the second match was the first 5-star match in 7 years in the U.S. So the first is always going to get more talk and stuff. But also, the second match, like this match got stiffed in all the awards in like newsletters and stuff because it happened in early December. And especially like the way the Observer does stuff where it's like, it might not even have qualified because they usually do like the cutoff ends at a certain point in either like November or December for what counts because they wanted to get the awards out early.
At the time, the Observer Awards cut off in November. So this was this was eligible for the next year's awards, which was, by the way, the same year as Joe versus Kobashi. So
yeah. And even like the Torch and stuff, I feel like those guys we'll get to on the next episode where they give out their awards. I don't think they even had seen, by the time they did their awards, they hadn't seen this match yet.
Right.
So it's like, I feel like in that sense, when people go back and just read newsletters or read like best of lists, by the nature of how long it took Ring of Honor to get tapes out, and by the nature of people trying to get like their best of lists right at the end of 2004 or the start of the next year, I feel like this match does not get the credit it deserves because of that, probably. Although also Meltzer did not give it as high of a rating, which obviously influences his readers. He gave it 4.25. Yeah, he which we can get to in a minute. And Matt, I want to ask you my one other problem, and it's a minor problem, obviously, because I'm giving this match 5 stars and saying it's the best match we've watched so far. I thought the first Steamboat spot, the one where he catches Punk's hand wiggling, I thought that, even though I love the significance of it, like how I mentioned, I love how it kind of wraps up that storyline. I do think it's kind of a bad spot in the sense that Punk's arm did really go down 3 times. So should it really matter if like 10 seconds later his hand twitches? And also,
sorry,
I was just gonna say his fingers don't really start wiggling till Steamboat says they're wiggling. Like
that's true. Also, I think it depends on your interpretation of that rule. Is the match stopped because the guy's arm drops 3 times, or is the match stopped because the guy is unconscious? And if you interpret it as the guy's unconscious, well, then he's not unconscious, so it doesn't matter how many times his arm dropped. That's never been super clear anyway in the history of wrestling, really. So I think it's fair game.
Like you were talking about stuff being too cute. That was the one moment where I felt like this is kind of really cool, but part of me was like, you're getting close to the edge here.
Laying it on a little bit thick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that was the one time I kind of got to that feeling. I think you probably had a couple times, but really great match. I'm just going through my notes before we get to the reaction to the. Go on.
And by the way, you already have a little bit of spoiler for our year-end awards on the next show. You know that Trevor and I are going to have different winners.
No, it's going to be obviously it's going to be
Jerk Jackson versus Trent Acid. Yeah.
It's going to be something on Final Battle. Obviously, we got to keep the suspense. It's going to be. I mean, just quickly. Oh, okay, Matt. This is obviously the biggest point we did not talk about. Did you notice that at one point at ringside, a little kid at ringside, when they're brawling at ringside, wants Joe to beat up Punk with his bottle of Pepsi. He's like, hit him with this.
Hit him with Pepsi. Yes, I remember. He was also holding that Pepsi bottle up at Punk when Punk was doing his entrance, and it felt like Punk didn't look at him, and maybe the kid was just mad that Punk didn't acknowledge the Pepsi.
Oh God. Also Punk, great bleeder. I thought the commentary for this match was overrated. Some people like the commentary. I thought Joe Punk 2 was Nolte and Gabe's best work as a team. I thought they oversold stuff here. Even though this match was great, I thought they went over the top. I felt like they didn't pick up on the significance of like the blood stopping Punk from doing headlocks as much as they should have. They didn't really directly comment on that element. And I also thought, like you mentioned, Gabe saying that Punk might have suffered brain damage or died at the choke at the end, like that. Talk about laying it on too thick. Like, come on.
Not necessary in that moment. It was dramatic enough without that.
Yeah. But anyway, so next up, we'll go to some thoughts from, we've been referring to this on the last two matches they had, the famous Joe Punk shoot interview, which if you can hunt down a copy of this, it's obviously not through official channels anymore. It's out of print, but it's a great DVD. So here's their thoughts.
Although I just saw Gabe on Twitter saying that he has extra copies of all of his ROH DVDs and is wondering if there's a market for selling them. So you could maybe just buy it from Gabe.
Don't bug Gabe too much, but maybe you can get a copy there. So they got asked a lot of questions about this match, obviously. Joe said they were a lot more confident going into the third match than the second. They thought whatever it was going to go, it was going to go, and it was going to be pretty good. Joe said there was high expectations, but not a lot of personal pressure. Punk said they agreed that they weren't going to try and top the second match because they didn't think that they could. They just wanted to tell the original story they had in mind from the first match. Because remember, I think we kind of figure out going back that it was really supposed to just be a 2-match series. That second 1-hour draw, which ironically is a lot of people's favorites, was because they needed a match to make up for Steve Corino having to cancel a match with Joe. Punk said he was worried about the crowd reaction because he says sarcastically, because Jersey loves me. And I will say, Punk's been getting pure babyface reactions on all the cities lately except Jersey. There's noticeably like half the crowd at least does not like Punk in New Jersey. Punk says the no time limit stipulation for the third match was his idea. The idea from the onset was to get everyone expecting this super long match and then not give it to them. He says the third match was 30 minutes, but here's a really interesting point, Matt. Punk says they actually only were planning on going 20. They said he just wanted to go nuts right from the bell and just be like a sprint that completely subverted expectations. But I guess, sometimes matches go longer than you intend. It went 31, but they actually only wanted to go 20. Punk says a big part of the story was the blood, the idea that the blood prevents Punk from going 60 minutes. That was a conscious storytelling decision. Punk says Ricky Steamboat came up with the idea of Joe putting his feet on the ropes. He says right after Steamboat left backstage after telling them both that I think you guys should try this. He says me and Joe both looked at each other and just went, that's a stupid idea. You wouldn't do that. And then they both separated for a couple minutes to put on their gear. And when they both came back together, they had both thought about individually and were both like, actually, that's a genius idea. We should do that. And which is, the reaction I had to watching that. And then
Steamboat's greatest contribution to Ring of Honor.
That seriously is. I think that, maybe there's something we're not aware of, but at least of the things we know, that's one of my favorite spots in wrestling. And
yeah.
And again, that's a great spot in this. Another point of why I think these matches are so much better if you know the history, because if a lot of other wrestlers do that, you just go, oh, the guy put his feet on the ropes. What's the big deal? I see a million wrestlers do that. It's only a crazy cool spot if you know that Joe never has done that and never you don't think he ever would.
This was an extremely cerebral match in terms of how they put it together. They put so much thought into this.
That's one of those things. Right, a few days before we're recording this episode. A few days before, a little quote from Dave Meltzer on a message board went on about how Kenny Omega put more thought into his matches than anybody. And,
I was thinking the same thing when I said that just now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you led me right into it. I'm glad you put the bait right on for me, and I bit it But yeah, and I'm not saying Kenny Omega's a fantastic wrestler, but these guys put as much thought into this match and this series as I've seen anyone put into any match. And to the point where even you're like, there might be almost too much thought. There might be a little up their own asses, which I think other people have thought that too. Like, so, but whether you love this match or just think it's great or think it's overrated, like the idea that Kenny Omega he treats wrestling like a movie and no one's thought about matches this deeply. This match is full of meaning and so many things they do have like real like layers of depth and reference things that happened months or years earlier. Like just
you want to talk about psychology? Like, come on.
Yeah, and so going back to the review, Joe says Steamboat had a lot of input in the whole finishing sequence. He says from the first choke on, Steamboat had a lot of input into the whole sequence to happen. So more than just that one spot. Joe and Punk said they were working on the match in the back and they didn't know what to do for the finish. And Steamboat came up with the idea of having the timekeeper of him stopping the timekeeper from calling the match, and also the idea of Joe continuing to reapply the choke at the very end. Joe says they were looking for elements in the match to show how Joe wanted to retain the belt at all costs. And Steamboat then asked them to meet him earlier in the night. And he asked Joe then, have you ever been a heel in Ring of Honor before? And when Joe said no, in fact, Joe in the shoot goes, well, no, I've never really developed my character that much. He said.
Yeah, I mean, Joe sort of was heelish at points early on. But yes, yeah. I get his point.
And so Joe says once he told him no, then Steamboat said, well, how about you try putting your feet on the ropes for this match? And then Joe thought Steamboat was a crazy old man at first, but like Punk said earlier, about 5 minutes later, they both realized it was the most brilliant idea that they had ever heard. Punk says there's no in-between. You either love him or hate him, and New Jersey hates him. Punk says he wanted to come up with ways to make it look like he was going to win, to give the New Jersey fans heart attacks and, quote, kill them. So, Joe points out there was a fan in the front row who was, and I didn't see this fan, so maybe it was not on camera, but he says he was super vocal all match in support of Joe. And he says, right after I did the foot on the rope spot, I looked at the fan and we like locked eyes and shared eye contact. And he says the fan looked at me as if I had just shot his dog. And Joe said that moment's like what he lives for in wrestling. And he says he actually used that as like almost like an actor's motivation for the rest of the match, that like he was a bad guy willing to do anything to win. Joe says they wanted for one match, no matter how hardcore a fan you are, no matter how many newsletters you read, to have fans lose themselves in the match. And he thinks they did that in all three matches, but especially in the third match's ending sequence. Punk says that after the near fall for the first choke, where he kicks off, they do the Piper Brett finish, and it's a near fall with the turnbuckle. He kicks off the turnbuckles while he's in the choke. He says, we created a few minutes where the fans didn't know who was going to win. And he says the entire three matches were building to those final few minutes. And I do think, like you were saying earlier, those final few minutes, they were buying into everything. So I think Punk's absolutely, right there, that in those few minutes they created, like, it doesn't always happen in wrestling where the fans literally don't know when the match is going to end and who's going to win. Punk says he wavers back and forth on if the second or third match was his favorite. He says maybe the second was a better match structure and execution-wise, but the third match is off the charts emotionally. Punk says the finish of those final minutes of the third match is the biggest rush he's ever had in wrestling. Here's an interesting thing, Matt. The interviewer then, who wasn't Gabe for the shoot, then asked Punk if there was a finish Punk originally had in mind that Gabe said no to. Punk says he can't remember, and then Joe vaguely recalls that there was, but he can't remember what it was. And then I guess they tried to get a hold of Gabe during a break in the shoot, and they couldn't. But apparently there is a finish that Punk wanted to do for this match that was rejected by Gabe. So this was not the original finish. The interview then asks if there was anything they'd have done different. Punk says he wouldn't have blown up in the match. Apparently he was, which you don't really notice, although I guess he is selling a lot. Joe says just technical stuff, like he wouldn't have slipped coming off the top rope. That's what you talked about earlier, where he kind of caught Punk in the face with his knee. And Punk says he shouldn't have done the drop kick off the apron to the floor, as he killed himself on that. And Punk also said Joe kicked his shoulder out of the socket. Like, I guess that's a note I forgot to mention too. Punk's shoulder came out of the socket, and he did not get it back in until the next day during this match. When asked how they want their trilogy to be remembered, Punk says his whole objective was to get the Ring of Honor World title over as something people would die for. Punk says they were two young guys having 3 matches. They didn't have any business being as good as they were. He says he would refute people comparing them to Steamboat and Flair. He said those guys wrestled almost every day. We wrestle 2 or 3 times a week. So he's basically saying, we're not the level of those guys. We don't have their experience. Joe says he wants fans to remember the matches fondly as some of their favorites. Joe says it's not the end of it. Neither of them are retired or in the WWE, and he thinks there will be more from them down the line. Unfortunately, Joe, there's not going to be any more from – I mean, you will face off in the same ring together, but you're not having a singles match ever again. And so that's their comments. And next we'll go into, finally, Matt, the reaction from the newsletters and some live notes. Mike Johnson writes, CM Punk popped his shoulder out during the main event. He popped it back in the next day and isn't expected to miss any ring time. The Observer wrote, a lot of people were expecting both a title change and another 60-minute match, so they weren't ready for the finish, but it was another great match with great reactions. It also hurt that Joe and Punk didn't even get to the ring until 11:40 p.m. I heard someone else say midnight, but either way, late.
The idea that they weren't ready, like expecting a 60-minute match, maybe. Not being ready for the finish when it happened, no way is that true. Nobody was like watching that be like, oh yeah, this match is going to go another half hour. Like no way.
Yeah, that's the thing. Whoever told that, Dave, is nuts, because all those near falls at the end, even Punk and Joe would just have that quote talking about, they were buying into everything. They thought the finish could happen at any time. So the idea that the fans, a half an hour in, were thinking, oh, this is going to go another 30 minutes, like, there was no match in history that would have had like 40 minutes of near falls. Even All Japan, like, no way. The PW Torch wrote that regarding the Punk-Joe 3 match on December 4th, Sapolsky calls it an incredible match. It was absolutely incredible, he tells the Torch. I watched it as a fan with my friend in the bleachers of the Rexplex, and everyone was glued to the action.
His friend was Gary Michael Capetta.
And going crazy at all the pinfalls and submission attempts. It really was something special, and I want to thank CM Punk and Samoa Joe for giving me a match that I could watch in the bleachers and pop for like a fan. I think the Punk vs. Joe trilogy from 2004 with the matches at World Title Classic, Joe vs. Punk 2, and All-Star Extravaganza 2 will stand the test of time and be talked about for years and years to come. Gabe, at least in this podcast, you're totally right. And then finally, Matt, the main event for this before we wrap up the rest of the little interview bits of the show. Long-time listeners of Through the Years have known we've had a rocky relationship with Dave Meltzer's reviews of Ring of Honor matches, how he has this habit of kind of giving positive reviews while also comparing them to every other match under the sun and kind of giving them like these passive-aggressive positive reviews where it's like, well, this works in the indies, but it wouldn't work here. I think there was a show a few months ago where Dave did not do that. He like went the opposite direction where like Dave's finally learning. Matt, I feel like this is the payoff fitting for a match that paid off so much. I feel like this is the ultimate payoff because we've been swerved, Matt. This is Dave Meltzer's review of Joe Punk 3. I saw the tape of the December 4th Joe versus CM Punk match from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and would give it 4.25 stars. It was a little better than the first match, but I don't think it compared overall to the second match, which was as good a U.S. match as I've seen in years. Then he writes, I watched the Misawa Kobashi 2003 title change match this week, and even out of its time context, it blew away any match of 2004 to the point that I was amazed at what a different plane it was on.
Totally unnecessary to put that in this review. By the way, as much as I love that last match, there was a match that was much better. Just so you know, don't get too excited.
By the way, for Dave always saying that the 5-star scale was never a 5-star scale and it could have always gone to 6 or 7, we just have a quote from him saying that Kobashi Misawa from 2003 blew away any match in 2004. It was on a different plane.
Including 2 5-star matches.
Exactly. Like, what the fuck are you talking about then? Why didn't you give, then by that standard, you should be giving I keep saying Misawa Kobashi, like 6 stars. That would make sense then. But anyway, Joe Punk 3 played a lot off the first 2 matches, particularly the second one, as they built similar spots and crossed up on them. Mark Nolte and Gabe Sapolsky did a great job explaining the strategy and added a lot to the story they were telling. For layout, in a sense, it was better, and it had a finish, although the 60-minute draw in the second match was an awesome finish and how it came out, and something that came across as really special. After watching a lot of 30-minute matches from Japan over the past 2 weeks, I thought from a layout standpoint, this was better. Sasaki Tenzan was harder hitting and felt more believable, and Tenzan Kawada looked like a war in the clips compared to Sasaki Tenzan, and Sugiura Kanemaru was more exciting. As good as they were, Joe and Punk, as they were in this match, would not make it in the WWE without greatly adapting their style. The stuff they do is too heavily tailored for a niche audience that likes long technical matches, and that's a tiny percentage of even the audience WWE still gets these days. Foley pushed for them to be signed, and Steamboat, now as an agent, also recommended both men. Plus, WWE is in the mode right now of looking to add a decent amount of talent. The impression I have is the higher-ups, and ultimately this is a Laurinaitis call, are skeptical because of their physical appearance, and the tide is against it happening. Joe gets away with being a tough guy in Ring of Honor because everyone else is so much smaller, but in WWE, to their audience, they'll see him as an average-sized guy who isn't in shape. Even Rhino looks more powerful and is more explosive, and he's struggling just to stay on the radar these days. And Joe will have to get over in 6-minute TV matches. Both are very good on Ring of Honor style on interviews, but Joe's current laid-back, confident Bockwinkel style isn't suited for a WWE undercard guy. Punk on interviews is good enough, but he's really cruiserweight size. Chavo Guerrero can talk and work and look where it's gotten him since Eddie went single. And it's not just the company's fault, because the company did try to push Chavo versus Kidman off as something real, and the fans didn't buy it at the house shows or on TV. Matt, there's so much I could say here. First off, how the fuck did that end with a Chavo Guerrero Kidman talk?
Well, how is he okay? I mean, even Chavo Guerrero would probably say it's absurd to compare him and CM Punk to each other on promos. Like, he called CM Punk good enough. CM Punk is one of the best promos of the last 20 years. Like, and he was already at 2000 and it's like that.
The Raven stuff.
Yeah, so undersells CM Punk's like personality here. The idea they'd have to really adapt their style. Oh, you mean they're not going to have hour-long main events in WWE because that's clearly the only kind of match these two guys can have? Like, this idea, like, everyone has to adapt their style. Why would this concept that these super talented, versatile guys can't adapt their style is so ridiculous. I do get that Joe had a look that might have been hard for WWE at the time. And Punk was not that big. But, like, Punk had charisma out the ass, and, like, his promo skills were, like, just top elite tier. And, you know, I mean, you saw Joe in TNA a few months later. Like, yeah, TNA and WWE are different, but Joe wasn't working a slow technical style. He was working, like, fast-paced, hard-hitting, high-spot matches. Like, those wouldn't have gotten over in WWE. And just, obviously, in general, like, just the need for him to even go there in reviewing their matches, like, having to say that is just so stupid. Like, just, was the match good? Was it good for its audience? Did it do what they was trying to do? Was it really fun to watch? Like, that's all you need to say. You don't need to talk about how it would have played for a different audience that they wouldn't have done the same match for anyway.
Like, I get Dave. Like, I don't think Dave's being malicious, but I think the problem is Dave, and I think a lot of other people too, they so often tie like creative success with business success. Like, you know, it can't just be a great match. You have to be like, well, it's one of the greatest matches of the year, but it wouldn't work in WWE. You know, that, like, could you imagine if like some, like, Rolling Stone reviewed like the first Ramones album in the 70s, and they were like, yeah, this is like the greatest album we've heard in years, and it's going to completely influence bands for decades to come, but could they sell out Shea Stadium? Like, no, so got to dock them some points. It's like no one, like, real reviews separate commercial success viability from creative, like, quality. And this
also, like, even if you want to go there with business stuff, like, for ROH's business, this match did business. Like, yeah, I'm sure it sold a lot of DVDs. Like, yes, it didn't draw them the same way, but, like, this series of matches was good for ROH's business. Like, was ROH
Joe Punk 2? I was going to say Joe Punk 2 was their best-selling DVD, I think, until Joe versus Kobashi. So think about it: better than Muda's show, better than Liger's shows. You know?
Yeah, ROH's business was based on having great matches. Like, that's what their business was.
Yeah, and it's just, even like, you know, Rhino looks more powerful and is more explosive, and he's struggling to stay on the radar these days. Like, just the idea that, like, well, you know, Joe probably wouldn't do good in WWE because look at Rhino. Like, nothing against Rhino, but come the fuck on, really? Like,
Yeah.
you just gave him.
Sorry.
No, you go on.
I wonder when Dave really turns the corner on Samoa Joe and realizes, like, oh, this is like a top notch great wrestler, as opposed to like, well, this guy's good in his world. Like, there is a point that comes at some point where he treats Danielson and Joe like they're really top wrestlers. But I think even all the way to when Danielson gets signed by WWE in 2009, he's still making comments about like how he may or may not be able to hack it there because of style and stuff. Like, just, it's a pet peeve of mine. Like, super talented people can adapt their style. Like, that's one of the things that makes them super talented.
You know what this reminds me of is how so many, like, Triple H used to always do that line where people would be like, why are all these indie guys in NXT for so long? He's like, well, they have to learn, like, how to work to the hard cam. And people are like, really, it takes you years? Like you were saying earlier, like, talented people generally can adapt pretty quickly to situations like that.
Right.
Like, this idea that, like, Joe and Punk would be powerless to figure out how to, like, adapt to working at a TV match. It's just, like, yeah, they just be like, oh, I'm lost. What do I do now? I can't do 60. I can't wrestle then. Like, but I guess my last thing for this I will say is, even though we're being hard on Dave because he can be weird and annoying as hell sometimes, like, the idea that Joe would never make it because he looks a certain way, that was a common belief by not just a lot of people in wrestling, but by, a lot of fans at that time. I mean, I showed you a review today, Matt. I won't shame the person because they're allowed to have opinions, but there was a review from close to that time of this match where that person shits all over Joe and basically is talking about him being blown up when I don't think he was. And, like, basically, I think a lot of people just look at Joe and they just go, schlubby fat guy. His name is Samoa Joe. That's a dumb name. And they just wouldn't even give him a chance, where I think Joe's a guy where, yes, the name at first sounds kind of dumb. Yes, he looks like a chubby Samoan guy. And then, in the vein of a lot of Samoans with that body type have been big in wrestling. But I always say with Joe, like, if you watch Joe wrestle one match, you get it. Yeah, yes, if you just look at a picture of Joe and see his name, you go, what? That guy's the future? But if you watch him wrestle one time in a reasonable match, I think you understand.
The one thing I will say in Dave's favor is, it is true at the time that probably Joe and Punk wouldn't have been really made it to the degree in WWE, but it's not because of their ability to adapt. It's because WWE wouldn't let them, right? Like, they didn't take Samoa Joe when he was in his prime. They chose not to, and Joe obviously chose to stay in TNA. With Punk, it took them years to really do what they needed to with Punk, and the only reason he got a chance in the first place was because Paul Heyman was there. So it's like, yes, WWE's shitty way of picking talent at the time would have held them back, but certainly nothing about their abilities would have held them back.
Yeah, and I don't know what Joe could have done in WWE, but like, he could have. What's to stop him from having the career that Umaga had?
No, Joe. If they wanted to make Joe a star, Joe would have been a top star in WWE. Like, I'm convinced of that. But they didn't, so he wasn't.
Yeah, so I guess we'll start to wrap up. We still have a few little things here. After the match, Joe poses with the belt as Punk students help him recover. I guess we should mention they try to give this a more Japan feel, where some of Punk's students were his ring boys at ringside, and Joe had Jay Lethal with him, which I think he also had in the last Punk match. Steve-O enters the ring and he whispers something to Punk. Joe gets on the mic and he tells Punk to look at him. Joe says, people may not like his methods, but this is the most important belt in the world, and it belongs to him, and he will do whatever it takes, whatever the cost, whatever that needs to be done to keep it his belt. Joe gets a mixture of boos and cheers for this. Joe says the fact is that the real reason the belt means anything, though, is because of guys like Punk who will do whatever it takes to try and win it from Joe. Joe extends his hand and says, it was an honor. Punk shakes it. Joe says it doesn't matter if next up is Austin Aries, Nigel McGuinness, or John Walters. He says Low Key's time will come too. Joe says most of all, he's here to address someone that called him out when he wasn't here, so he's returning the favor. He screams out Mick Foley's name, and he says to meet him, a real wrestler in a real wrestling company in front of real wrestling fans, and then he'll have Joe's respect. Joe ends by saying the champ is leaving the building, and thought this was a pretty fantastic promo from Joe here.
Yeah, good stuff, and good that they allowed the fans to bask in the moment of the match, but they still kept the ball moving forward.
Yeah. And then we cut to Sugar Sean Price backstage with the Becky Bayless side of Special K, which is her, Angel Dust, and Dixie. They're pissed their friends turned on them for Lacey. Becky says they did their share of partying, but that bitch Lacey pisses her off. So it's time to show her what Becky is about. Dixie wants to teach the rest of Special K a lesson for turning their backs on friends.
I have to say, I enjoyed Becky saying, when Lacey, when she beat me up and gave me a DDT, that pissed me off. Like, just you're like, did it now?
Cut to Moff and Whitmer chilling in the concession area right by the soda machine near the sink. Gabe tells them Alice in Danger signed them to a fight without honor against the Carnage crew. They're both into it, and Moff notes a fight without honor hasn't been done in a year. Moff says all four men aren't going to come out of it the same, but Moff and Whitmer will come out of it on top. Moff warns Alice in Danger that she's messing with their pockets and their careers, and they are very close to doing something real, real bad to her. Don't know if you have any thoughts on that little promo.
Nope.
And then final segment. Elsewhere backstage, Gary Michael Capetta is there with Austin Aries, whose chest is all marked up from the Low Key match. Gary informs Aries that because Low Key wouldn't go for the 5 extra minutes tonight, Aries will be the one that gets the next Ring of Honor World title shot. Aries has a big goofy smile on his face for a lot of this promo. Kind of looks like a goober. Aries says that Key's attempt to screw the fans only screwed himself. Aries says that there's no one that is going to stand in his way of becoming the Ring of Honor World Champ, and he means nobody, which I guess maybe a little hint about what's to come with Alex Shelley. And then that's the show. The Observer wrote, crowd wasn't into the first half of the show, but largely was into the latter half and super into Punk versus Joe. Matt, this is one of those shows where it's such a long show where it's almost hard for me to remember like how to sum up like my thoughts of the show, because I was like, oh yeah, that was part of the show too. But what did you think about the show as a whole? Because obviously, one match looms large on it, but a lot of shit happened on this show.
Yeah, you know what? I was excited for the show, but also kind of dreading it in the sense of like, oh god, it's so long. But I have to say, I thought it was a great show. Like, it wasn't super consistent the whole way through, but there was so much good stuff on it. And it had, the Heenan and Cornette stuff. And it was like, so they had the comedy and entertainment. It had a bunch of good wrestling matches. The main event was so spectacular. It's like Gabe threw everything at the show, and I think it paid off. I didn't find that the crowd was so dead for the first half, obviously for some stuff, but I'd say like this was a hotter crowd altogether than at the last Rexplex show or the one before that. Obviously they weren't up for anything as much as they were excited for Liger, but in general they were really into a lot of the stuff. I have to think about it, obviously, and I have until the next show to think about it. But I think this might have been overall the best card of the year. For ROH. I'm trying to think of which one is a bit like, there's no obvious best show of the year to me. There's a lot of like top match candidates, but like there's a lot of good shows. There's no one show that stands out as like spectacularly great. But I think this one is pretty close to great show, and the main event was just so good that it's definitely going to be in consideration for my show of the year. Let's put it that way.
Because of just its length, it's not as tight as maybe some other shows this year. And, some of the undercard stuff is just okay. But the highs are so high. And also, I feel like this show, Ring of Honor, like a lot of wrestling companies, or a lot of wrestling period, things end, but it always feels like something else has to come up. And in this show, you definitely had some of that. But this show felt like the closest Ring of Honor gets to a WrestleMania in recent times, in the sense of, like, the end of Joe Punk felt like the end of something huge, Like we had seen like the end of an era.
2003 had the first year anniversary that clearly felt like a big show, and it had Death Before Dishonor, the first one, which felt like a huge show. This year, those Death Before Dishonors and Glory by Honors, they didn't really feel like particularly big shows. They were good, but they didn't feel big. This was one of the few shows of the year, especially since the big split, that really felt big in terms of like matches that were built up to, closure, payoff, and just like really top-notch work in some of the matches. So, yeah, I agree with you there.
And kind of going full circle from something you said much earlier in the show, how a lot of Ring of Honor's big shows were big because, you talked about like the Jeff Hardy show or the WrestleMania weekend show or the Liger show or, Muta show, where a lot of their shows are big because of some like foreign star, outside star or some special circumstance. Like this was a show that obviously with Bobby Heenan had a big like special guest, but this show at the end of it felt like it was a huge show because of a Ring of Honor storyline paying off between two Ring of Honor stars, like, which again kind of gave it a real special feel, I felt like.
Totally.
So that ends the show. What a show, long show, but I guess we christened the new feeds with a very long, very eventful, very big, notable show. If you want to contact us on Twitter, I'm at Trevor Dame, D-A-M as in Mother E, at Mayor MGF for Matt. ThROH The Years at gmail.com is our email address. That's THROH for through. We have a thread on the ProWrestlingOnly.com plugs forum if you want to talk on the message board. Obviously, we're available on so many podcast feeds on YouTube starting soon. We've got our first couple old episodes on YouTube. So much stuff. So many ways to contact us. I have a dumb Patreon even at www.patreon.com/MECCA Mecca. It's dumb. Probably shouldn't subscribe to it. But most of all, next episode, folks, if you thought this was huge, holy shit. Next episode is Final Battle 2004. And if you've been a long-time listener, not only are our Final Battle episodes just episodes where we cover Final Battle, which are usually big shows, we also, at the end of that, then do a whole other section where we do year-end awards. We sum up our thoughts on the year. We look over, like, the couple major newsletters, what awards what they gave out to Ring of Honor, and just typically some of our biggest shows of each year. And, Samoa Joe's legendary year plus title reign, it ends. So, that happens too. So that's the next episode, Matt. That's going to be, holy shit. I'm exhausted after this episode, and I think that episode's going to be just as huge and
it'll also
notable.
Be a milestone for us because we'll have finished 2004.
Yes, and then we'll start 2005, Matt, which is more shows. It's a longer year than this. It's just more stuff, more notable stuff, like maybe the most notable year. It never ends, folks. So
no, I mean, literally at our pace, this show is gonna go as long as we survive this show, which obviously is a pretty big if given the world right now. but assuming that happens, this show we'll be there for you for a long time to come.
So, just stay inside. It's safer for a variety of reasons. And look forward to the shows. And again, now you have a nice feed with 54 episodes of, probably is like you could listen to a week without sleep and just listen to us. And what a week that would be. But until next time, have a good time. Have a great time. I have never paid for sex.